Ano ang nagagawa ng lokal na gobyerno para sa iyo? Maayos bang nagagamit ng pamahalaang lokal ang ibinabayad na buwis at iba pang pondo? Nakasali ka na ba sa mga desisyong ginawa para sa iyong komunidad? Muli mo bang iboboto ang kasalukuyang pamunuan ng iyong lokal na gobyerno? Is more power to local governments more power to the people? Elections, Devolution, and the Local Government Code 3 decades after. Bahagi ng #Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series ngayong November 26, alas 9 ng umaga. Hatid sa inyo ng UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor, Task Force Nation Building, ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies at ng Department of Political Science. Ano ang nagagawa ng lokal na gobyerno para sa iyo? Maayos bang nagagamit ng pamahalaang lokal ang ibinabayad na buwis at iba pang pondo? Nakasali ka na ba sa mga desisyong ginawa para sa iyong komunidad? Muli mo bang iboboto ang kasalukuyang pamunuan ng iyong lokal na gobyerno? Is more power to local governments more power to the people? Elections, Devolution, and the Local Government Code 3 decades after. Bahagi ng #Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series ngayong November 26, alas 9 ng umaga. Hatid sa inyo ng UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor, Task Force Nation Building, ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies at ng Department of Political Science. Ano ang nagagawa ng lokal na gobyerno para sa iyo? Maayos bang nagagamit ng pamahalaang lokal ang ibinabayad na buwis at iba pang pondo? Nakasali ka na ba sa mga desisyong ginawa para sa iyong komunidad? Muli mo bang iboboto ang kasalukuyang pamunuan ng iyong lokal na gobyerno? Is more power to local governments more power to the people? Elections, Devolution, and the Local Government Code 3 decades after. Bahagi ng #Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series ngayong November 26, alas 9 ng umaga. Hatid sa inyo ng UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor, Task Force Nation Building, ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies at ng Department of Political Science.
Okay, good morning and thank you everyone for coming. This is the Pilipilunas webinar. Is more power to local governments, more power to the people. Elections, Devolution, and the Local Government Code 3 decades after. We are also live streaming on the UP Sahalalan 2022 Facebook page. So this webinar is co-organized by UP Diliman Task Force Nation Building, an initiative of the UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor, UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, Program on Social and Political Change. The webinar is also co-presented by DZUP 1602, UP Sahalalan 2022 of the UP Diliman Department of Political Science and the Diliman Information Office. We begin our webinar with the welcome remarks from the UP Diliman Chancellor. Dr. Fidel Nemenzo is the 11th Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He is also Professor of Mathematics at the College of Science with his research areas including number theory, elliptic curves, and coding theory. He has held research and teaching posts in Singapore, Tokyo, Amsterdam, Munich, and Phnom Penh. Among the awards he has received are the Achievement Award in Mathematics from the National Research Council of the Philippines and the UPD Gawad Chancellor para sa pinakamahusay na guro. He was president of both the Southeast Asian Mathematical Society and the Mathematical Society of the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chancellor of UP Diliman.
Salamat, Rob. Magandang umaga sa lahat. In behalf of UP Diliman, I welcome everyone to this morning's webinar. This is the fourth in a series of Pilipiluna's 2022 webinar series, a series of roundtable discussions on governance and development issues. And today we discuss local governance and decentralization. Alam niyo, nation building has always been at the core of UP's mission. We were founded behind the idea that a modern nation needs the contributions of its citizenry, and that the National University, with its threefold mandate of teaching, research, and public service, is perhaps the central institution delivering on this need. We launched the Pilipiluna series last August in order to put UP scholarship and expertise to reflect on the state of our nation and contribute to the policy discussions on some of the most pressing issues of our time. From this series, we hope to draw up a governance agenda that we hope will contribute to the national conversation leading up to the 2022 elections and beyond. The series is organized by the UP Diliman Task Force Nation Building in partnership with the different research units and programs of our university in order to impress on our policymakers and the public our university's readiness to help our country rebuild our political, economic, and socio-cultural institutions, all battered by the pandemic, on more sustainable and equitable foundations. For today's webinar, the task force is fortunate to collaborate with the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies program for social and political change, and in particular, Dr. Ella Atienza, who is convener of this morning's webinar. Today, we focus on local governance that is set to undergo major changes in 2022. Next year, local governments can look forward to receiving a bigger amount of national taxes as the Supreme Court's Mandanas ruling goes into effect. At the same time, in exchange for more resources, will come greater responsibility for public service delivery in line with EO 138, which was issued this year. These two policies combined would lead to complete devolution as some political, well, this is the question, will these two policies combined lead to complete devolution as some political analysts have predicted? Equally significant, the coming elections will also put into play more than 18,000 local positions at the municipal, district, and gubernatorial levels. Clearly, those who will be elected in the local races will be the stewards of the transition toward more empowered local governments. So in this light, we ask, is more power to local governments more power to the people? This morning's discussion will provide a multidisciplinary analysis of the 30-year-old local government code. Our colleagues from 3 colleges will present their research on the gains in and the challenges to local public service delivery, economic resource mobilization, as well as citizens' participation in local governance. We hope that today's Pilipiluna's webinar will shed light on the local contests and what are at stake for our local communities. To this end, I'd like to thank Dr. Tonet Raquiza, who chairs the UP Diliman Task Force Nation Building, Dr. Ella Atienza, and the UPCIDS Program for Political and Social Change for convening this morning's seminar. I'd also like to thank the UP Diliman Political Science Department, Halalan 2022 project. Salamat din sa DZUP and the UP Diliman Information Office for their assistance in helping get our messages out. Thank you to our moderator, John Robert Gaw of the Department of Political Science. Salamat, Rob. Finally, I'd like to thank our presenters, Dr. Alex Brillantes of NCPAG, Dr. Joseph Capuno of the School of Economics, and Dr. Ella Atienza of the CSSP. And our discussants, Irma Asuncion, Ed Dadem, and Paul Hutchcroft. And to everyone here who have joined the webinar. Maraming salamat at magandang umaga sa lahat.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Nemenzo, for your welcome remarks. We would just like to remind our participant, please post the question on the question and answer box. The questions will be read during the open forum, and we also encourage everyone to use the hashtag PILIPILUNAS 2022 in posts about the event. And now we proceed with our first presenter for this webinar. Our first presenter is Professor Alex B. Brillantes Jr., who is a professor and former dean of the National College of Public Administration and Governance of the university and a UP scientist. He is Secretary General of the Eastern Regional Organization for Public Administration, Europa, and the chair of the board of the School for Experiential and Entrepreneurial Development, SEED, of Gawad, Kalinga. Dr. Brillantes was president of the Asian Association for Public Administration, where he represented the association in the meetings of the Committee of Experts on Public Administration of the UN and also of the UN Public Administration Network, UNPAN, in the United Nations. He published refereed articles on public administration, governance and institution, decentralization and development administration in several local and international journals, and edited books. Professor Brillantes was visiting professor in Kobe University, Meiji University, and at the Graduate Research Institute for Policy Study GRIPS in Japan, visiting fellow at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, and visiting professor at the Euromed School in Marseille, France. He obtained his PhD and MA in Political Science from the University of Hawaii and MPA and AB Political Science from the University of the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, to present his topic, Local Governance and Decentralization in the Philippines, Status, Issues, and Directions, let us welcome Professor Dr. Alex Brillantes Jr.
Thank you very much, Jan. It's so good to see you. I haven't seen you for some time. I really miss you, but looking forward to your coming back very soon, Parigo. Okay, so thank you also to Chancellor and to, of course, to those who organized this webinar, particularly, of course, Dr. Tonet, and of course, Dr. Atienza, and of course, to Ms. Alep Gayosa for this opportunity. So it's a very, very important point, and we talk about the fact that our local governments is more power to local governments, more power or to the people or through the local government code. And you know, I will answer that later. But I've been in the field of local governance for what, maybe even more than 30 years. In fact, I have the original copy of the local government code here. Even before the code was passed, we were already going around the country talking about the code. It's even in photocopy, and these were done when I was working with PBSP and DILG. The point being, we've been talking about that for the longest time, and indeed, but it's not new because my presentation will talk about the quick historical context, and I say in 20 minutes, the local government code, what are the major issues and concerns, and moving forward. All of us are familiar, of course, with the Mandanas Garcia decision, which my friend Dr. Capuno will zero in, and we've had a number of webinars on this already. But I think it's very, very good that we in UP continue to push the envelope in terms of examining both sides of the issue, in terms of is it empowering or is it disempowering? Okay, and we'll talk about that earlier. And I'll talk about what we call the rapid field appraisal, a project that we've been doing for the past, 15, 20, maybe about 25 years now. Ever so often we do a rapid field appraisal of the state of local governance. And I'm very happy that we're doing one now with the National Research Council. And I'm grateful to Dr. Atienza for enabling this linkage, if we may, with the NRCP. Okay. Anyway, main messages. There's an enabling framework. The local government code is there 20 years now. We have good leaders at the local government. May pera po, pero hindi sapat po. Mandanas decision. Stronger interlocal partnerships, local governments coming together. Wider participation, civil society. There are issues there. Broader leagues for local government. And there's some good and best practices. A program that I was involved with for the longest time is called Diliman, still continues up to today. And we continue to recognize good and best practices in local governance. As I mentioned, there are some issues and concerns from lack of finances to inadequate capacities, unclear corporate and taxing powers, performance management, and of course, good old-fashioned elite capture and dynastyism. So what are the next steps, which we'll talk about earlier, later on rather, will be within the context of the upcoming Mandanas decision. But you know what we're talking about? Full implementation of devolution. Napag-usapan na natin yan. I was in a forum recently, and you know, it's deja vu. Parang 1992 ulit pa tayo, because we've been talking about the full implementation of devolution. 30 years, we're still talking about the full implementation of devolution. But after having said that, let's recognize that this is an evolutionary process. It can't happen overnight. Okay, and we're moving in that direction. And I mentioned already interlocal cooperation and rapid field appraisal. So as you know, as we all know, decentralization is supposed to be both a management tool, a political tool, a management tool, a political tool, to decongest, to deconcentrate, to hasten decision-making process, but it's also like as a political tool in terms of participation, to deepen, if you may, democratization, to deepen citizen participation within the context of what we have been told, subsidiarity, i.e. things are best decided at the lowest level possible. Hence, at one point, I remember there was a speech delivered by President Ramos a long time ago. He called it the 3Ds of decentralization: decentralization, development, and democratization, and development. He talked about that, no? And I was fortunate to have been part of that initiative with the president before, and with Rafi Alunan, and we did the speech for the president, which he delivered very nicely, I thought. Okay, but as academics, you know, we have nice theories, we have nice frameworks. And as an academic, we did some frameworks, which we did a long time ago, it's 2002, when we talk about decentralization, 3 types: deconcentration, devolution, and debureaucratization. Debureaucratization, getting out of the bureaucracy. Getting out of the bureaucracy is very, very important. Devolution, local governments that we're talking about today, and deconcentration, management, administrative. But at one point, we also said, you know what, you could put that in a continuum. In terms of the transfer of power from deconcentration administrative to devolution to regional autonomy, what we have perhaps now in the Cordilleras and in Mindanao, and of course federal. We've been talking federal, but guys, you know what, federalism, we've been talking about federalism since the 70s po. Nauso lang po recently, but hey, okay, nalagay ulit sa back burner, but we've been talking about that federalism with Sina Gabi Iglesias a long time ago po. But for me po, federalism is something that we should talk about within the context of devolution, transfer of local governments. Hindi po bago ito. And then the last one, of course, is independence or Merdeka. The only reason I cite autonomy and Merdeka because I lived in Timor-Leste for a while, and in Timor-Leste they were calling for autonomy, or they were calling for Merdeka. And was there a political administrative mechanism to do this? Yes, it was regional autonomy, but the people decided their Merdeka independence. That's why we put a continuum here. It's really continuous transfer of power. And for us today, we are in the era of devolution. I cite this power. I'm a product of the 70s. I remember when we were kids, not kids, but you know, power to the people, and which is really what our webinar is all about. But I took this picture at one point in the US, no? And in the States, you talk about when you buy, let's say, a jacket or a pair of pants, after a week or two, or even a month or two, pwede mong ibalik, basta nasa yung resibo. And I was struck kasi may section dun sa mga stores nila, return. And what does return mean? Devolution. So I said, hey, this is nice. It's a nice thing to say that, you know, at the end of the day, devolution is all about returning power where it belongs in the first place, which is what we're talking about today. Is devolution work in the Philippines? Well, as I'll say, the jury's still out, but for me po, I think we are moving in that direction. Of course, may mga problema. We'll not romanticize it, but hey guys, we are moving in that direction. Okay, and it's not only in the Philippines po. Other countries, Spain, UK, Czechoslovakia, Canada, Quebec. Remember Quebec, Aceh, Ambon, and Timor, where I had some work with Patani in Thailand. They also had that kind. And of course, in the Philippines, Bangsamoro, if I might add, even us in the Cordilleras, I say us in the Cordilleras, because I'm from there. A friend of mine, his name is Rolly Buendia, at one point wrote a paper on the Cordillera Nation. Point decentralization, point autonomy is really something that we want, because we want to exercise power at the local level without always being told from the top. So that's what, as you know, that is what subsidiarity is all about. So historical context, very quickly. The only reason I put this, I know I've only 20 minutes, is that I won't read it, of course, but just to suggest to you po that the discussion of devolution, the discussion of local governments, the discussion of power to subnational local governments has been there pre-Spanish. May barangay tayo, Malolos Constitution, Republic Act 226/1959, Barrio Charter Act under the the Republic 2370, Decentralization Act in 1967, even the Marcos Constitution talk about decentralization. And guess what? Even the Marcos had his own variation of the local government code. Batas Pambansa bilang 337. And kami sa NCPAG noon, I remember we were also part of that movement in terms of just pushing the envelope of power to the local governments. Of course, you now have the 1987 Constitution, it is there. And of course, you have the local government code, our topic for today. And the 4 aspects of local government code, very, very important po. 1, delivery of basic services. Agriculture, health, social services, environment. About 70,000 people were transferred when it was enacted. But delivery of services, things that should be done or must be done at the frontline local level. Regulatory powers. Pati, alam mo pa, regulatory powers, you know, at one point we were so centralized that you know that even the registration of tricycles belong to national government. But of course, you now have the building code, etc. So the role of local governments, or the role of government in general, and local governments in particular, deliver basic services and regulation, enabling framework. But as I'm always saying, ang hugot po nito, it can also be the disabling framework. But I'll talk about that. Of course, increased financial resources era. Internal revenue allotment, we have issues on that po. And then we have the taxing powers and how local governments have become more entrepreneurial, build, operate, transfer, floating of bonds. And of course, this one, and we've been involved in this for the longest time, the context for people participation. In the local government code, you have the local development councils that have 1/4 of which are members from the NGOs. And of course, there are some concerns about that. But the point is, there is now a mechanism at the local government where 1/4 is allocated to the NGO, 1/4. But of course, there's some issues. You have NGOs and you have NGOs. Okay, we'll talk about that if you want to. And at one point, we have also sectoral representatives, also at the local legislative body, representatives of indigenous people, representatives of tricycle drivers, yung mga marginalized. In theory, the enabling framework is there. Okay, so at one point we also did a master plan for the implementation of the local government code. You know, very, very romantic. Change over, transition, stabilization, and up to today we're still talking about stabilization. And the transition, we're talking about that sometime. Point when you talk about transition, you're talking about transferring the powers, not only that powers, but also the devolved people who were transferred at the local level. And these were the issues that were raised in the master plan and also the oversight committee, of which we were privileged to have been attending. I was once with the local government academy, no? And we worked there. I was there for about 6 years or 5 years. Local government academy, second and full time po. So maraming issue po. Local finance, legislation, personnel, what do you do with personnel, what happens to their careers, relationship between LGUs and NGOs, and of course, clarifying the powers. Okay. So what are the major issues and concerns? Very quickly po, finance, including local and financial management. Dokoy here, who is the expert on financial decentralization, let's talk about that. At one point, we also worked together on this po. But it's very, very issue. I've said in a publication that, you know, decentralization without financial decentralization is meaningless. As the Ilocanos would say, agawi tayo, amin na po. Kung walang pera, umuwi na tayo. But that is at the core. Kaya maganda po yung Mandanas decision. But we'll talk about that po. Let's not jump all over the world. Hey, may Mandanas. Sandali lang po. Tingnan natin po yung hugot nun. Malaki yung hugot nun. Number 2, LGUs have become more entrepreneurial. I've talked about how they become quite creative. I'll not go through this anymore, but one issue there is the important aspect of capacity building. You know, one lesson I learned over the past so many years is that kung minsan si national government, I was once part of that, no? Even when I was in Ched, mayabang tayo. I say that in a positive way. National government, ay hindi kaya ng local governments. We should hold their hands. Hindi na kaya. You know what, guys? We keep on talking about strengthening local governments, but we forgot about strengthening ourselves at the national. And that for me it's a very, very how would you put it, patronizing paradigm. We can learn a lot from the local government. So though we don't go and tell them, you have to do this, marami tayong mga memos, sandali lang po. Let us learn from them. So for me, it's really a two-way process. So that's a paradigm at one point that even in the LG, we have continued to advocate that, you know, when we talk about capacity building, you don't only quote unquote develop the capacities of local. That's why I hate this term, tulungan natin yung mga tao sa baba. Excuse me, you're talking about some kind of hierarchy, no? You know, but it's really working with them. So when we talk about capacity building for local governments, we should also talk about capacity building for national government agencies. capacity building for national government agencies, and that's very, very important given now the upcoming the implementation, of course, of the Mandanas decision. Part of capacity building is letting to let go, and what are the aspects of let go, even the powers, even the money that local governments have. I was in a webinar with Governor Kowa at one point, and we were talking about, okay, ililipat na sa mga local government under the Mandanas decision, pero may pera bang kasama nun? Hindi po magkakasi yung pera because some of it will still be held on by the national government. That's another issue altogether. We have done some initial studies on this, so capacity building is very, very important as far as we're concerned. And of course, the issue of urbanization, globalization, and the good and best practices like Galing Po. I'm not romanticized Galing Po because for me, is it working? Yes, it is. You know, we started this. This was in 1983 with President Ramos, with Rafi Alunan. You know, and these are staff at the LGA, and I'm happy po. I'm not being but I'm happy po that Galing Po continues up to today. The point being, we continue to recognize good and best practices at the local level. Okay, I guess it's like looking at a glass that's either half full or half empty, and I don't know if it's 3/4 full or 3/4 empty, but there are also good practices out there. Okay, and these are some of our earlier winners. I was able to. I usually use this picture, but among others, we were working with Tatay Nene Pimentel. You know, our colleagues from the Ateneo. There's Emma Porio, and there's good old Jesse Robredo in the back. So si Jesse nasa likod lang yan. But look, he was one of the paragons. And there's of course our good friend si Dr. Eddie Dorotan. Point, dear friends, after the local government code, maybe hanapin natin or we document them because the paradigm, they teach us and not them. 1 + 1 = 3. Of course, hindi ko sinasabing walang role si national. May role. Pero at the same time, it's really 1 + 1 = 3. It's synergy, us working together. Okay, so these are some of those. I'll go very quickly to this because I know I have about 10 more minutes. The Citizens Charter. I remember Jesse Robredo saying ang kanyang dream is for every house in Naga to have charter. What is that? Andun yung mga rights ng mga tao and you can demand. In terms of procedure, wala pa yung ARTA noon, ginagawa na nila noon. Then of course, Valenzuela at one point, di ba, I said kanina, what is decentralization? It's both a management and a political. Management, this one, Valenzuela 3 is you can get your business permit. I'll go to that just one word po in 2 minutes po. Okay, as long okay. Then of course, and Abra, the sit empower people. Abra, where I'm from, also I'm from the North po. Citizen Abra for Governance, creating the enabling framework for people participation, CCAGG. Of course, there were some problems. In fact, problem is an understatement because one of the lawyers of the CCAG himself was murdered because of their continuing assertion or demanding accountability in local government, their presence. Okay. Then, of course, local governments coming together, Kabalikat local governments. This is in Cotabato. The Palma Alliance is called Pigkawayan, Alameda, Libungan, Midsayap, Alias, and Pikit, Manisila. Point, local governments are simply imaginary units. You have to work in the ecosystem. Yesterday, I was with a group from Baguio and we were talking about BLIS. Baguio, La Trinidad, Itogon, Sablan, Tuba, and Tublay. Hindi pwedeng isa lang po. You have to work together, whether it's a watershed, whether it's delivery of basic services, whether it's pollution, you know, hindi pwede. But political units, imaginary po yan. We have to work across the ecosystem. Watershed, etc. So, Quezon City itself has won several awards. In fact, it won an award. And very quickly, I have what, 5 more minutes. I'll just show you just a breezing through. We just finished po the last Galing Po Awards po. And what did we have po? I'm happy about this po. But through the years po yan, almost every year except ng pandemic po. What are these po? You had a winner from Upland Sustainable Agricultural Forestry, Convergence in Agusan, cocoa sugar, using the native intelligence. Cocoa sugar, this was in Alabat, in Quezon. Then in CDO, Cagayan de Oro, the health is worth fighting for. This is Mayor Moreno, easily one of outstanding local governments. No? Then of course, this is now like yung sabi kong Palma, local governments coming together, network of alliances in Negros. Hindi lang isang, because you know the coastal covers all of us. Hindi pwedeng isa lang LGU. Okay. Then of course the pagkain in Quezon City, right here in Quezon City, given the pandemic po, and San Juan, Agapay, Lingkod, Gabay, etc. Okay. All I'm saying po, and this is in Tagum on sustainable environmental approach, and of course, pass permit, which I've just mentioned in Valenzuela. I'm very happy about this LGU po. In fact, it will easily win, I think, the UN Public Service Award, which we are also part of po. And of course, now in Tagalog Village in Valenzuela, and of course, live streaming. So in sum, success factors, leadership, important ang leadership, people participation. We should get engaged. We should get involved. We always tell ourselves, no? Alam mo, makikinig lang ang mga LGU kapag tayo ay marunong magalit. If we assert ourselves. If we don't assert ourselves, they'll continue stepping on us. So I think that's a very, very important part. And then partnerships with institutions, including with CIDS, with UP. We have this paradigm with Roldy Guzman. I remember Roldy Guzman. I love that guy so much. My former dean, he passed on. But RPG used to talk about town and gown. Town and gown. Tayo sa UP. We have to work with the LGU. In other words, the town works with the gown, and the gown works with the. When we graduate, of course, we used to work that. We used to wear our gowns, but we are irrelevant. Kailangan tayong maglanding. Kailangan maglanding within the context of frenetic. So, in sinasabi ng practical wisdom, we cannot always remain in the ivory tower. We have to praxis. We have to involve theory and praxis. Okay. So these are partnerships, multi-sectoral. I like this inter-barangay cooperation. Inter-barangay cooperation. I mentioned this also. Local governments should come together. And isang aspeto, I don't know if Dukoy pare, we're looking at this, but we're looking at this with the LG right now. You know what? There are many LGUs that are non-viable. So our advocacy, why can't we amalgamate? No, interlocal cooperation. In fact, even political amalgamation. The best amalgamation, not best, one of the good amalgamations that we have had is the Igacos, Island Garden City of Samar. 4 municipalities, now 1 municipality. We also have the Sorsogon Bacon, a city and a municipality, now 1 municipality. And that's the way we should go. Because at one point, we did a study for the LG, and I told them, you know what, we have too many LGUs. Hindi sila, marami sa kanila ang hindi po viable. And that's the counterintuitive that we are going against. Because obviously one of the things that we talk about is, we gerrymandering, creation of local governments. But again, can we put this stop that? I don't know if we in the academy, and that's what NCPAG and my colleagues are doing, we have to come up with appropriate figures to show that many LGUs are not viable. In terms of population, land area, etc., etc. That's in the code. But of course, we being political people continue to create. And I remember being visited by a number of congressmen when I was dean, that they say, you know what, we have to create a new province kasi ganito. Then he would tell me in an aside, alam mo kasi wala akong tatakbo next time tapos ng term ko. So I need an area. That kind of bowed, but very honest disclosure. Okay. So last part po, what are the areas of policy reform? Financial autonomy, government functions and powers, national local relations, local personal administration, personnel, local government performance measurement. I'll go to that in the last 3 minutes, capacity building and people participation. And of course, the whole idea of federalism. I sent this to you, Aleph, earlier. So very quickly, financial autonomy, the issue concerned, let's talk about the implication of Mandanas. Government functions, I already mentioned on the creation of barangays. In Baguio City, they have about 125 barangays. Pwede yan maging 25 lang. Or more, Mayor Richard Gomez, a good guy, really good mayor. Alam mo, 25 barangays, pwedeng 3 lang. Point is amalgamation. Let's move in that direction. And that will be an excellent study, but they did that in Japan, and I think it's possible. Now, I already talk about national-local relations. Kung minsan national, hindi po nagkakatugma. And then, of course, personnel, anong kanilang mga direction. And of course, this is nice. Local government performance measurement, something that has come into the picture. 3 more minutes. Something that has come into the picture. Local government performance measurement. At one point, performance has never been in the discourse of local governments. But now, when we're in the ILG, we talk about LGPMS, local government performance systems. Then it evolved into a seal of good local governance, a seal of good housekeeping during time of Secretary Jess. And then, of course, you now have the seal of good local governments. Point is that, let's look at those indicators. It might not be perfect, but the point is these guys are already thinking of performance, and in relation to what the Chancellor mentioned earlier, you know what? That should be one particular criterion when we elect our local governments. Ano bang naging performance nila? Okay. At meron po tayong mga figures po dyan. At of course, it might not be the best, but hey, it continues to evolve. Capacity building, I've mentioned that. Capacity building within the context of national, local, but equally important po, we have been involved in setting up, working with different LGRIs, local government research institutes, Cotabato, in the Cordilleras, let them be the one to do the capacity building in partnership with us. It cannot always be national government. That would be the height of presumption. People participation, a very, very important part. Ito yung sasabi ni Chancellor kanya. And the question we're asking, will it lead to participation? Political concerns, of course. The 3-year term of local officials is really something that we should look at. We really need some kind of a pendulum from the Marcos years. Ang tagal-tagal, okay, pinalik natin 3 years. But you know what? 3 years for a local government is really too short. First year, they learn the job. You've heard this. First year, they learn the job. Second year, they do the job. Third year, they're ready for election. Nothing, no time. So maybe it's something that we could look at. For me po, the barangays, at one point, I stuck my neck out here. But at one point po, even barangays at elections at the barangays should be something we should examine. Because po, that's an area of a lot of corruption, so much politicization. Perhaps we should consider transforming the barangays into simple administrative units. I know I'm sticking my neck out. The LG will kill me for this, my friends. But it's something that we should continue discussing. Are they more effective as administrative rather than political units? Okay, because a lot of divisiveness, a lot of politics and corruption there. Federalism, I've already mentioned that. Na pinag-usapan po natin yan. It's in the back burner out, but I think we should continue to discuss that within the context of empowerment. And finally, interlocal cooperation. I mentioned already Palma Alliance. I mentioned Bliss. Let's work across boundaries. Political units are simply artificial. Okay, and of course the Mandanas Garcia, I'll not talk about this now, but I just added this and I know Doko is going to talk about this. This I think is a very, very important point because now it's been corrected, if you may. But the thing we should ask, are the monies to be transferred to them under the EO 138? No, I've talked to many local officials. Sapat pa yung perang ilipat sa kanila kasi po pati na po yung mga functions. Former services that were delivered by national, lahat ay ililipat sa LGU. Pag-usapan natin kasi naku, talo po sila. Isang halimbawa lang po, yung health, alam po, senior citizens lang. Yung paglipat ng senior citizens, yung benefits ng senior citizens, that's already 50% of the budget of one LGU. Health, under Doko, you're the health expert. Under health, meron Magna Carta for health that will already eat up a lot of the so-called Mandanas quote-unquote windfall. So I think we should be more circumspect when we talk about that. Okay, so I already mentioned this. I won't go to this because I've already used my time. So next steps, right now po, we are involved, and thank you, Ella, for introducing us to this. We're working on the another rapid field appraisal. And tama-tama po, we're working with the office of Senator Tolentino with NRCP within the context of maybe participating, shaping the discourse on local governments. So yes, we have an enabling framework, strong leadership, improved access, but we have good practices, including galing po. But of course, there's still many, many things to be done, including the need to study the era, implications, interlocal cooperation, RFA, and equally important, building international linkages. We have to think local and act global. So this whole notion of globalization, learning from Indonesia, from Thailand, and of course they come here to learn also from us. Okay. So with that, as the young kids would say, flex daw namin ito. Pero we're going to come up with the second volume of our book, and Governor Mandanas has agreed to write the forward to that. So I'm very grateful for this time. I think I went a bit over time. Maraming salamat, Jan. It's always good to see you, and looking forward po to our discussions. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, thank you very much for that very energetic discussion, Dr. Brillantes. Now we move on to our second presenter. Our second presenter is Dr. Joseph J. Capuno, who is a professor at the School of Economics, University of the Philippines, Diliman. He has published articles in public economics, fiscal decentralization, political economy, local public finance, development economics, equity, regional growth, 4 Ps, fertility, choice, schooling decisions, and health economics, randomized experiments on health insurance and primary care for CVDs, health-seeking behavior, health finance, UHC, impact evaluations of WASH interventions, and clean fuel for cooking. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome to present from IRA to NTA, what do the last 30 years foretell, Professor Dr. Joseph Capuno.
Good morning, everybody. It's always nice to, I agree with John Robert, that it's always nice to hear Alex talk. Yeah? He's very energetic, intense as always. hindi ko nagsasawang makinig sa kanya. There's so much more to to learn from him. He certainly provokes a lot of things in your mind, points for discussion. So thank you, Alex, for that nice talk. My talk today is about the internal revenue allotment, which will be called the national tax allotment starting in 2022. The title is slightly different from the one announced in the Pagbangon, but the coverage is the same. It is also intentionally blurred to dispel all rumors that I have the gift of foresight. Okay, so can you see my screen, by the way?
Yeah, clear, pare.
Yeah. Okay, so besides the elections and perhaps the COVID-19, full devolution will happen in 2020. By that, I mean there will be an increase in the LGU incomes and in the expenditure responsibilities devolved to them as well. The first one is an offshoot of the 2019 Supreme Court decision on the Mandanas Garcia case. Alex has already mentioned about this, but to expound a bit on it, basically what it means is that there's going to be a shift from internal revenues to all national taxes as the base for computing the LGU share. Note that there are no other changes in the formula, in the existing ERA formula. So just the base of the LGU share in the total is what is changed. But the allocation between national and local in terms of percentage and among local governments, again, in terms of percentage, is not going to change. The internal revenue allotment will now be called the national tax allotment starting in 2022. But what it means is that LGUs are going to get bigger transfers in amounts, and less funds will be left with the national government as a consequence. The first year of the implementation of the Mandanas ruling will be next year. And the national tax allotment is estimated to be around 960 billion pesos, which is a lot more than what the local governments will get under the old formula, which is around 846.31 billion pesos only. So anticipating the possible fiscal imbalances between the national government and local government units, the President issued Executive Order number 138 this year to effect the full transfer to LGUs of devolved functions specified in the Local Government Code of 1991. So currently, the national government agencies and LGUs are preparing what is called their devolution transition plans. Basically, the plans will outline the changes in the functional, organizational, and staffing structures of the concerned agencies and local government units as we shift to full devolution. There's going to be a committee on devolution as well. And then in addition, there will be a growth equity fund. Basically, this is a fiscal equalization grant or grant scheme that will ensure that local governments do not, to ensure that local governments get enough resources, for example, to address poverty issues, to spur local development, to ensure that they have the capacity to deliver their devolved services. Okay, but what could happen in 2022 may have already happened in 1992. Yeah, in the early years of devolution, many local governments, by early years meaning 1992 and 1995, Alex will attest to this. Yeah, in the early years of devolution, many local government units were net fiscal losers, which means that the increase in the ERA that they got from the national government were less than the required expenditures on the devolved services, facilities, and personnel. So while they got more money, they also got more expenditure responsibilities in 1992. And not all of them got enough money. Now, to avoid the same thing, next year, where we expect local governments to receive more money and also assign more expenditure responsibilities, we want to know how much fiscal space there will be for the additional expenditure responsibilities, given what we know about how local governments have been spending and how they have been mobilizing the revenues in the last 30 years. And we also know the expected eras or NTAs in 2021 and 2022 from DBM reports. So from this data, we can estimate what we call the sensitivity of local government units' finances to possible changes in the era, meaning as we shift from the era to NTA. So this is basically what we're trying to do. We want to assess the possible effect of NTA on current and total on current expenditure, meaning it's the total and the composition, and the possible effect of NTA also on the local revenues. Given this information, we will know the fiscal space, meaning how much local government can accommodate in terms of new default functions such that they do not become net fiscal losers. We may not know the exact net fiscal losers, if any, since we don't have the data about new devolved functions. These are still being computed by the DBM and LGUs. But with this information, the blue lines, the blue circles, we can anticipate potential problems that might arise in the process. Okay, to do that, we examine the local government finances in the last 30 years. This slide shows the annual average per capita income and the average per capita expenditures of the provinces, cities, and municipalities. I don't have the data for barangays, and it's too much to process them. There are 40,000 of them. But so we have the three main local government levels: provinces, cities, and municipalities in this slide. Let me talk first about the raw data in this slide and in the next few slides. The fiscal data are from the Bureau of Local Government Finance, which derives them from the statement of receipts and expenditures submitted by the local treasurers. Compliance is high, but never always perfect. So there are years when there are missing data for some LGUs, but not a lot. There are only a few of them. The figures for the provinces and the cities are individual level, individual LGU level, while the figures for the municipalities are aggregated at the provincial levels. So what are we seeing? The average per capita incomes of provinces, cities, and municipalities have been rising, as you can see on the left figure. Have been rising faster and more steadily in the last 10 years than before. By far, the richest are the cities, whose incomes in the year 2020 were about twice as much as those of provinces, and about 1.5 times bigger than the municipalities. We also observed that the gap between municipalities and provinces have been widening since 2010. On the right slide, we see that expenditures are also rising. This is not surprising. They have more money, and therefore, what else are they going to do with the money except to spend? So give them more money, they spend more. And the same trends is observed, right? The increases are somewhat more steady in the last 10 years than before 2010. Again, cities outspend the municipalities, which in turn also outspend the provinces. Again, the gap is widening between municipalities and provinces since 2010. So where do their money come from? Okay, they spend, they have money. Where do their money come from? LGUs on their own earn income from local and external sources. Internal sources include tax revenues and non-tax revenues. The main source of tax revenues are real property taxes. This is the amilyar that we pay to local governments every first quarter, and business taxes, and sometimes also amusement taxes. Whenever you go to the movies, buy a ticket, a part of that is a tax emitted to the local government. Whenever you eat out in a fancy restaurant, sometimes there is a local tax added to the bill as well. Non-tax revenues comprise fees and charges for government services, like when you pay, I don't know, maybe parking fees or garbage fees, or whenever you take out a permit from the municipal government, you pay a mayor's permit pay for the mayor's permit. Those are part of the non-tax revenues that local governments generate. As we can see from the figure on the left, tax revenues account for over 20%, but less than 30% of the total income of cities. So tax revenues between 20 and 30% for cities, but less than 10% for provinces and municipalities. What about non-tax revenues? All three LGU levels, generate 10% or less of their total income from non-tax revenues since 2010. So if you add these two sources together, okay, the total share of locally generated resources account for only between, say, 20 to 40% of the total incomes that they have annually. So where do the rest come from? The 60% or so. Here we see the share of the internal revenue allotment through the years for the different levels. Okay, so as you can see, the internal revenue allotment accounts for about 60% of the total annual income of cities. It's even higher for provinces and municipalities. It's about 75. It fell from, say, 80% from 2014 to about 74, 75% in 2020. That's a lot. That's about what 75 centavos out of each peso that they generate comes from the central government or their share in the resources generated by the national government. Ito yung internal taxes. So for this reason, many scholars and observers call local governments, brand local governments as era dependent, meaning they rely heavily on central transfers for their resources. Okay, so that's a story about the big story about revenues. Locally sourced revenues is around 20 to 40% only of the total revenues. By far, the biggest share is due to the internal revenue allotment. That is the story for the last 30 years. Okay, so with all that money, what do they spend it on? Okay, so here we see the share of social services and economic services in the total expenditures of local governments. Social services comprise education, health, nutrition, population, labor and employment, housing and community development, social services, and welfare. Economic services would include agricultural extension services, veterinary services, operations of markets, slaughterhouses, so forth and so on. Okay, so what do we see? First, the social services. Before 2010, the coverage is 2001 to 2020, sorry. The data for before 2001 is incompatible. I mean, there was a change in the accounting system that makes it hard to compare data before 2001 to afterwards. Okay, the share before 2010, the share of social services has been falling, but since then it has been rising for all LGU levels, as you can see. Of course, it's rising faster for provinces than it is for municipalities, for example. But broadly speaking, the shares of social services after 2010 are on the average greater than the shares in before 2010, at least for cities and municipalities. But still, the share of social services ranges only from 15% to 25% by 2020. Okay, what about economic services? By 2020, the share of economic services is below 15% for all three types of local government. So if you add the two together, say 15 plus 25, that's just 40%. Okay, so out of each 100 peso that they spend only less than 50 pesos on social services and economic services. And remember, these are the frontline services. These are the services that, that the people actually access when they go to local governments. So what else accounts for the rest of the money that they spend on? This one shows the share of general public services. General public services include executive services, office of the mayor, office of the vice mayor, the local sanggunian, administrative services, planning and development coordination, civil registry, auditing, treasury, assessor. These are what I call overhead expenditures or back-end services. You don't really go to local governments, to hear, how the local sanggunian conduct its business. Yeah. More often than not, you go to local governments to, to avail of health or, petition for scholarship or for, pavement of your barangay roads, so forth and so on. Not the general public services. And yet, as you can see, since 2010, yeah, the share of general public services has ranged from, 35% to around 60% of the total expenditures. So in other words, by far the biggest share in total expenditure goes to the overhead expenditures or the back-end services. I call them general public services. Between 20 to 45% is allotted to social services and economic services. Okay. Now, so we know where the money goes. Now, with that, we want to know what will happen. Yeah. So we expect the ERA to increase next year, as I've shown in an earlier slide, by about 30%. What good will that do? Yeah. By that I mean, how will local governments spend their money? Okay, so since they're going to spend different, they're going to get different amounts from the central government, it's hard to compare cities, municipalities, and provinces, or across provinces or across cities and municipalities. So we have to standardize the measure. One way, one standardized measure is what we call this elasticity. So basically, it answers the question, if the ERA of provinces, for example, increases by 1%, by how much will in percentage terms, by how much will the total expenditures increase? By how much, again, in percentage terms, will social services increase? Health services, economic services, so forth and so on. So this table shows us my estimates. Yeah. So 1% increase in the ERA of provinces, for example, will increase the expenditures on social services by 0.94%, less than 1 percentage point. Okay, so health services 0.84. I'd like to draw your attention to the last row. You see a number there, 0.44. So 1% increase in the ERA of provinces is supposed to increase the non-tax income. Remember, the non-tax income are the fees and charges that the local governments collect when they provide services to their constituents. It's going to increase by 0.44%, but the estimate is not statistically significant. So what it means is that 1% increase in ERA has no effect, statistically speaking, on the non-tax income. This is not to say that non-tax income will not increase or change or decrease. What it is saying is that whatever happens to the non-tax income is going to be unrelated to the changes in the ERA. So we shouldn't be worried about the ERA making local governments collect less. In fact, the number shows here in terms of tax income, they're going to collect positive amount. So 1% increase in ERA for provinces will increase their tax income by nearly the same percentage point, 0.96. Cities, 0.41 lang, mas mababa. Municipalities, if you look at the number, if you increase the ERA of municipalities by 1%, the increase in their tax income will be more than 1%, 1.22. So will they generate more? So the ERA dependency that we saw in the graph, in the previous graph, is quite misleading, because what we're saying here is that in fact they're going to collect more. maybe not as much as they can, but they don't necessarily not collect. Meaning the ERA does not have a disincentive effect. Kumbaga, binigyan mo sila maraming pera, hindi na sila makunguli, bababaan nila yung collection nila. Hindi yung sinasabi nito. In fact, they will continue to collect more, but not as much as the percentage increase in the ERA. Okay, so given these numbers, how may we use them to estimate the fiscal space available to local governments next year? This slide shows my estimates. No? So we know from the DBM how much more ERA, how much is the ERA that they're going to get in 2010, 21, and by 2022. So we can, given those raw numbers, we can compute for the percentage increase. Then we just multiply those percentage increases against the estimated elasticities, and we can see here by how much in percentage points, percent increases will the NTA generate in 21, 22 once they receive the higher incomes. So let's look at the provinces, the middle column, 21, 22. So we expect the transfers, which will be called NTA by 2022, to increase by 37.9%. Yeah, so from 2021 to 2022, the amount of money that local governments will receive from national government will increase by 37 or 38, by about 38%. Okay, with that increase, what can we expect? So the numbers in the middle, for example, in the middle column below the provinces, will tell you by how much percentage-wise increases can be expected in terms of general public services, social services, health services, so forth and so on. Okay, so as you can see, by far the biggest increase will be on social services, and the bulk will be on health services. So this means that they will increase their spending, given the increases in the ERA, by 31.7%. Okay, so that's a lot of, I think that's a lot of fiscal space. So so long as the devolved function do not exceed this in percentage term, then provinces can accommodate those increases. Okay, so you can interpret the other numbers in the same way. So non-tax income naman for provinces, since the estimate is not statistically significant, we don't expect them to change. That's what it means when it's not statistically significant. Yeah, but you can also notice that there is a downward arrow in 2022, 2023. Here I don't have an estimate. I'm only guessing here because we don't know the exact amount of the NTA in 2023. There's no estimate yet. But once we have that, we can apply the same formula and predict exactly the numbers as we did here. Okay, so but nonetheless, it tells us that what I'm showing here is that the shares, the percentage changes will be lower than what we expect in 21, 22. Why is that? Because the ERA in 2023, 2024, or the NTA in 2023, 2024 is expected to be lower than in 2022. Why is that? Because according to the ERA formula, the amount of money that will be transferred to local governments in a given year will be based on the tax collections of the national government in the third preceding year. So which means by the time in 2023, the basis will be the tax collection in 2019. And in 2024, the tax collection will be, the ERA will be, the NTA will be based on the tax collection in 2020. And we know what happened to the economy in 2019 and 2020, right? I mean, the economy was down, so tax collections will be down. And therefore, the shares of local governments in 2023, 2024 will also be down simply because the government collected less 3 years prior. So that's what we can expect. Okay, so here are my prognosis. They are not so perfect prognosis. The NTA in 2022 is foreseen to lead to huge increases in expenditure. That's given. Yeah, give them more money, they spend it. I think our value added here is that we can identify exactly which is going to spend more and on what and by how much. So we expect the increase in expenditures will be greater for municipalities than for cities or provinces. And they will spend more on social services, possibly on health, than for any other services for all types of local governments. However, there will be greater spending on GPS. This is the back-end services than economic services, which is I also call a frontline service. And economic services may not change because the elasticity is statistically insignificant, at least for provinces. Contrary to received wisdom, the era does not appear to disincentivize local revenue mobilization in the sense that they collect less. We have seen that the estimates are positive, although less than 1. So they're not collecting less because the estimate is positive, but they're not collecting as much as they possibly they can. So there's a positive though weak effect on tax revenues of provinces and cities. At worst, no effect on their non-tax revenues. Again, this is not to say that non-tax revenues will not change, but it will not be affected by the changes in the NTA. However, we see strong positive effect on taxes and non-tax revenues of municipalities. So we don't see municipalities collecting less as a consequence of the increase in their NTA. In summary, both because of the NTA per se by itself and its potential positive effects on local revenue mobilization, because we know from the estimate that NTA also has effect on revenue mobilization, LGUs will have some fiscal space for additional devolved functions in 2022. Okay, then our estimate of the percentage increases, that gives us the idea of how much fiscal space there will be. But note that the fiscal spaces would vary across LGUs. It's going to vary from provinces to cities to municipalities and across each LGU level within the same LGU level. Also, we foresee that the fiscal space will constrict in 2023-2024 because the expected NTA will be lower than the NTA in 2022. In these years, that's when we really need the fiscal equalization fund or the growth equity fund to address all those imbalances. So to answer the question, is more power to local governments, more power to the people? I would say a qualified yes. But if the question is reversed or posed differently, for example, is more power to the people, more power to local governments? I would say yes, definitely yes. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Capuno, for a very insightful and very informative presentation on the IRA and the future NTA. Now we proceed to our third and last presentation for this webinar. It will be given by Dr. Maria Ella L. Atienza, who is a professor and former chair of the Department of Political Science at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Her research interests and publications cover local governance and devolution, health and policy and politics. She is co-convener of the program on social and political change of the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies and editor of the Philippine Political Science Journal, the Scopus, an internationally refereed journal of the Philippine Political Science Association, published by Brill. She also served as director of the UP Third World Studies Center in 2010 to 2013 and president of the Philippine Political Science Association in 2007 to 2009. Her recently finished research projects are on constitutional performance assessments of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, particularly in the areas of the judiciary and local governments, and the ongoing pandemic, the rule of law and the use of emergency powers in the Philippines in the time of the pandemic, as well as prospects for alternative institutional arrangements in Metro Manila for health service delivery in the context of previous charter change debates. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome to present Devolution for Democracy, Constitutional Performance Assessment of Local Governments, Professor Dr. Maria Ella Atienza.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Assistant Professor Go. Good morning to everyone. And we are, on behalf of the UPCIDS Program on Social and Political Change, we are pleased to co-organize and convene this fourth webinar of hashtag Pilipilunas 2022 under the office of the UP Diliman Chancellor, and we're happy that Chancellor Fidel Nemenso is here, and we thank him for giving the welcome remarks. And this is the second, as mentioned by Chancellor Nemenso, this is the second webinar that the UPCIDS PSPC has organized for hashtag Pilipilunas. And we are grateful for all the resource persons, the reactors that agreed to be part of this very important topic on local governance, elections, and devolution, and what are the future prospects for the Philippines in this area. We tried also to invite some of the multi-awarded local government officials, but maybe because of the in preparation for the elections and their busy schedules, they cannot attend here. But we are glad that in terms of audience, we have a number of representatives from government agencies, particularly the DILG, the regional offices of the DILG. What I'll be, in the short time given to me today, what I'll try to do is to give you some, basically what I'll be presenting to you would be updates based on the project that I did with a number of colleagues from the UP Department of Political Science under UPCIDS. The project is entitled Constitutional Performance Assessment of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. We did this with the support of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. And the portion on local governments was written by myself and Assistant Professor Go. So we actually came out with two publications last year. The bigger output was in February 2020, Constitutional Performance Assessment of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, Summary of Findings. You can check that out online for details. But then the pandemic hit. We had a lockdown, and international idea asked us to give a preliminary assessment of how certain areas of the assessment, including local governments, have been affected as a result of the pandemic. So in July last year, we came out with a second publication, Constitutional Performance Assessment in the Time of a Pandemic. And we tried to see how the pandemic is changing, or maybe actually highlighting some of the issues and problems that we mentioned in the original publication. Of course, what we'll try to do in terms of updating our findings is that we're coming out with several policy briefs on the areas covered by the constitutional assessment, including local government. So what I'll show you today will be some updated items focusing particularly on local governance under the Local Government Code and impacts on democratization and people's participation in local governance. Okay, so what I'll try to do is to focus on key relevant areas in our assessment that will be relevant for the discussion for today, particularly in the area of democratization, local governance, and people's participation. I don't think I will have time to discuss other dimensions of the tool, including peace and conflict resolution and economic development. But what I'll try to do is to focus on some of the emerging recommendations, policy recommendations to address some of the challenges of local governance, particularly in the area of democratization and people's participation. Basically, you will see, and you can check out in more detail the two publications, what was the framework of our constitutional performance. We have two basic areas, internal criteria and external criteria. Internal criteria focuses on how far local governments have fulfilled the mandates of the local government code in terms of the institutions, processes, and laws enshrined in the Constitution. And external criteria, what are some of the general assessment tools, particularly in the area of political science, that we can use in terms of how substantive local governments have actually performed its function. So I'll be highlighting some areas regarding democratization, decentralization, social justice, human rights, and gender equality. And then in terms of conclusions and policy recommendations, this will focus on some of the materials that we gathered, including the focus group discussions we were able to organize before the pandemic regarding what to do with some of the issues regarding democratization and people's participation in local governance. So I don't need to put this too much in detail, but basically the 1987 Constitution, particularly Article 10, as mentioned by Sir Alex earlier, focus on promoting decentralization and autonomy. In the 1987 Constitution, we have a more extensive article on local governments compared to the 1973 Constitution. The Article 10 in the 1987 Constitution focused on the creation of autonomous regions in Muslim Mindanao and the Cordilleras, the enactment of a local government code, the granting to local government units the power to create their own sources of revenues and to levy taxes, fees, and charges, and provide local governments with a just share of the national taxes, which shall be automatically released to them. And of course, Dr. Capuno already mentioned some of the issues here and then the implications of the Mandanas ruling. Article 10 also focus on entitling local governments to an equitable share in the proceeds of the utilization and development of the national wealth within their respective areas. It also focuses on sectoral representation in legislative bodies of local governments, and the Constitution also provides for the creation of regional development councils or other similar bodies and composed of local government officials, regional heads of departments and other government offices, and representatives from NGOs within the region for purposes of administrative decentralization. So, of course, in terms of the internal criteria, we had a number of questions, and I'll just run down in terms of our assessment. Are local governments formed? We used two possible answers: thin compliance and thick compliance. When we talk about thin compliance, it means that formally the processes are ongoing, the institutions mentioned in the Constitution have been formed, laws mandated by the Constitution have been passed. So, but in terms of thick compliance, it means that in the area of local governments, the substantive aims of the Constitution have also been fulfilled. So are local governments formed? Of course, yes, but we decided that there is still thin compliance because definitely there are regular elections, but there were a few postponements, particularly in terms of the holding of barangay elections. Are local governments operating? Yes. But we also discussed that the appropriate answer to this would be thin compliance, and as mentioned also, and our findings complement the findings mentioned by Dr. Brillantes and Dr. Capuno. Definitely there are problems in terms of local governments fulfilling many of the functions that the 1987 Constitution envisioned them to perform, and the goals that they need to actually achieve in performing these duties. Have reforms in the Constitution been instituted? Yes, but we also talk about this in terms of thin compliance. Definitely, there's only one autonomous region currently operating. In 1991, the Local Government Code was enacted as Republic Act 7160. And of course, it promises to promote devolution, democratization, administrative effectiveness, and local economic development. And it incorporates most of the reforms mentioned in Article 10 of the 1987 Constitution. In terms of external criteria, when we talk about democratization, are local government officials selected in a legitimate manner? Our answer is there is thin compliance, because elections are held mostly regularly, but election-related violence, vote buying, dominance of political families, and other problems are still present. If we talk about the 2019 elections, 9 out of the 10 poorest provinces elected or re-elected members of political dynasties. And in 2019, I think Dr. Paul Hatchcroft is in the audience. He edited a book, Strong Patronage, Weak Parties, and he talked about the continuing patronage, particularly at the local level, and he linked this to problems in terms of political parties and electoral law. And this year, I think another university press, not the UP Press, will come out with a book, an edited book documenting patronage democracy and local elections. Are local governments viewed as responsive and accountable? Our verdict here, based on documents, is that there is thin compliance. Definitely, there are multi-awarded LGUs, as mentioned by Dr. Brillantes. There are the Galing Pook Awards being awarded annually. There are also other awards here in the Philippines as well as abroad, which actually cited our exemplary LGUs, but there are also accountability issues for other LGUs. Performance is also uneven. We have cases against erring local executives and other officials. Although to the credit of the DILG, it has also developed monitoring and evaluation tools in terms of performance. There are a number of local governance watchdogs, civil society organizations, and since the passage of the 1991 Local Government Code, we have seen increasing assertiveness and activeness on the part of various leagues of local governments and local officials. Okay. Then in terms of other areas of democratization criteria, are there institutional mechanisms allowing participation of citizens and groups in local governance? Yes. Not to repeat, but just to highlight some of this, Dr. Brillantes already mentioned them. The Local Government Code actually mentions 3 sectoral representatives in the Sanggunian, a representative for women, a representative for labor, and a 3rd representative to be determined by the Sanggunian, 1/4 membership for CSOs in the local development councils and local special bodies, and partnership in the delivery of services and local development, the processes of recall and initiative, and mandatory public consultations and hearings. But here's the problem. Are these opportunities or mechanisms followed in practice? Definitely, there is what we call thin compliance. Why thin compliance? Because not all of these provisions in the Local Government Code are actually implemented on the ground. There is still no law regarding sectoral representation. So many sanggunians now at all levels have no sectoral representatives in terms of how they are envisioned in the local government code. There are some so-called NGO representatives in the local development councils and the local special bodies, but if for areas that we've been to and based on our case studies, many of them are not actual NGOs because NGOs are not present in all areas, in all LGUs, and the local development councils have not been functioning as envisioned by the 1991 Local Government Code. The recall processes have been used quite a number of times, but not so much by civil society organizations using it for the purpose of accountability or making local government officials accountable. We noted definitely the vibrancy of civil society in some areas, but definitely civil society's vibrancy is limited and their existence is uneven across LGUs in the country. We still see patron clientelism, political families, and corruption. While there are a lot of openings for citizens' participation, there is lack of public information, awareness about local processes and local governments. Based on some of our discussions with the barangay officials and people in the barangays, it's very difficult even in areas with urgent issues. We had a project focusing on 20 barangays in areas affected by Typhoon Yolanda, and even in that area where you expect a lot of people to attend barangay assemblies to discuss projects and grants, they said that only beneficiaries of 4Ps are always present because they are required. So barangay officials have to entice people to attend, so they have raffles just to make sure that people attend. Okay. But however, we also noted, and Dr. Brillantes already discussed this, there are some promising areas here because we also see collaborative, multi-level, multi-sectoral cooperation among LGUs, to partnerships with some civil society organizations and the public sector, and there are increasing multi-level venues of participation. The problem is in terms of how to scale them up. In the area of decentralization, do local governments have sufficient powers and autonomy? And here our verdict is there is thin compliance because based on the LGC, local governments appear to have sufficient powers and autonomy, but there are challenges and difficulties, including, of course, the money available, but also capacity for a lot of LGUs. Do local governments exercise devolved functions and powers? Thin compliance also, because we see a mixture of best practices and LGUs having difficulties and challenges 30 years after the enactment of the Local Government Code. Do local governments deliver or facilitate delivery of public goods and services at the local level? We also noted thin compliance because the extent of service delivery varies across LGUs based on capacity and available resources. Are central local tensions resolved, and how the national government and national government agencies still flexes its muscles over LGUs even and despite 30 years of devolution, and as we have seen with the very top-down process of handling the COVID-19 pandemic, there are still a lot of LGUs reliant on the national government, although we see the emergence of really outstanding LGUs. The DILG and the Supreme Court are increasingly called on to intervene in many of these cases. In terms of external criteria regarding social justice, human rights, and gender equality, do local governments promote social justice, human rights, and gender equality? There is still a long way to go here. An even track record. Are women, minorities, and other sectors sufficiently represented? There's low compliance, no sectoral representatives. I think if you attended the second webinar of Pilipilunas, Associate Professor Jean Encinas Franco already mentioned the the lack of women elected officials at the local government level. Even in Metro Manila, only 27% of all local sanggunians are composed of women councilors. So in terms of conclusions, despite more than 30 years since the 1987 Constitution and 30 years since the enactment of the Local Government Code, we see disparities in local government's performance across the country. And we found out there is mostly thin compliance in terms of both internal assessment and external assessment criteria. We do have trailblazing examples of LGUs, but there is general underperformance in the 5 criteria for external assessment. To agree with the findings of Professor Brillantes, definitely performance is affected by limitations in the code and the electoral system, as well as the disparity in the quality of local leadership and personnel quality, local civil society presence, and citizens' awareness and participation. The ability to generate local resources and persistence of political patronage, clans, corruption, and national executive dominance. We see local democracy and people empowerment still a long way off. I was informed by the Secretariat that my time is up, but let me just try to wrap up in terms of recommendations for amendments to the 1987 Constitution to improve the performance of local governments. There are a number of recommendations already made, but some of these are more doable than others. For instance, making the ban or limit on political dynasty self-executing by defining what a political dynasty is, but maybe according to some experts and practitioners, perhaps we should start small. For instance, in the new SK law, there's actually a provision banning or limiting political dynasties. Perhaps we cannot do this at the national level yet. Perhaps we can start small in terms of specific laws. Of course, there are a number of suggestions already on reforming the party system because the party system and the electoral system has also affected the lack of fair, free, and equitable elections. And of course, there are a number of suggestions regarding how to make more sectoral representation, including women, more, in a way, they will have more chances of becoming elected at the local government level. There was also a suggestion to create a provision allowing the formation of other regional autonomous regions or regional arrangements out of provinces and cities who consider themselves and judged by the DILG and other government agencies ready to assume additional responsibilities in addition to the 2 autonomous regions mentioned in Article 10. In fact, in another project of UPCIDS, it's a project focusing on Metro Manila local governance and possible structural reforms, and we did this together with DILG NCR. A number of chapters look at how more metropolitan arrangements can actually help Metro Manila and possibly other regions work together to actually achieve the purposes of local governance and people's participation. Strengthening regional development councils and regional planning and implementation, institutionalizing the Mandanas ruling in the Constitution. In terms of local government code, stipulating in the local government code the process of selecting the 3 sectoral representatives, or the 2 houses of Congress passing a legislation finally settling the manner of selecting the local sectoral representatives, introducing some degree of close proportional representation, not only at the local level, but also at the national level, particularly for women. This is actually from a chapter written by Soc Reyes in the edited book of Dr. Hatchcroft, the institutionalization of the Mandanas ruling in terms of the base of the IRA or the NPA. And in terms of more equitable distribution, possibilities of amending the distribution formula of the 40% shares in national revenues in the code to make sure the provinces and municipalities who actually absorb most of the devolved responsibilities and services, as well as poorer LGUs, can get more shares than cities and more economically developed LGUs. And of course, to remove the process of, or the problem of dependence, possible dependence of poorer LGUs on the national government, include some conditionalities attached to the fiscal transfers, including good governance, performance scores, and incentives for raising local revenue. Some of the other recommendations were already mentioned by Professor Brillantes also, including the rethinking of our barangays and barangay officials. There are also suggestions of making them more professionalized, and at the same time making sure that they are trained properly for the responsibilities given to them. Of course, we cannot simply legislate improvements in terms of local governance and citizens' participation. There needs to be greater coordination between national agencies, the regional offices, and local governments, stronger implementation of accountability and transparency mechanisms, constant information dissemination and consultations by national government agencies like the DILG and other concerned groups like universities and civil society for all LGUs and local officials, not just about the local government code, but other relevant laws and proposed reforms. And this is where, as Dr. Brillantes mentioned earlier, that town and gown approach, making universities also partners, not only of local government units, but other stakeholders in local governance and local democracy. And of course, the most important thing is providing more information dissemination and skills training for citizens and communities, not just in livelihood training, but also knowledge in terms of the basic laws of the country, what are their rights and responsibilities vis-a-vis their local and national officials, particularly in demanding accountability and transparency. And of course, in view of the 2022 elections, greater voters education and awareness. So I think I'll stop at this point, and I welcome a lot of comments and also engagements with the points I've already mentioned. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Atienza, for that very refreshing presentation, giving us a look of the local government code in the context of the Constitution. To proceed, so we have ended all our three presentations, but before we proceed with the reactors, we will have a short video presentation from the DZUP. It's the Pulso ng Masa video produced by the DZUP. So let us watch the video.
Ano ang nagagawa ng lokal na gobyerno para sa'yo?
Kada buwan may natatanggap naman kaming ayuda galing kay Mayor.
Ang alam ko lang yung sa health center dito.
Actually, kakapagawa lang ng daycare dito banda sa amin. Kasama naman yun, di ba?
Maayos bang nagagamit ng pamahalaang lokal ang ibinabayad na buwis at iba pang pondo?
Di ko alam. Parang kulang naman kung ito lang nagagawa nila sa pera ng bayan.
Baka dyan sa mga daan yung pondo. Dami talagang tinitibag at pinapagawa ngayon eh.
Hindi. Hindi ko naman ramdam mga programa nila eh.
Nakasali ka na ba sa mga desisyong ginawa para sa iyong komunidad?
Hindi. Wala namang pinapatawag na meeting eh.
Parang hindi naman.
Hindi ko alam paano sila nagdedesisyon. At saka may trabaho din ako.
Muli mo bang iboboto ang kasalukuyang pamunuan ng iyong lokal na gobyerno?
Ewan ko, parang pare-pareho naman sila eh.
Oo, okay naman yung mayor at chairman sa amin.
Wala namang choice kasi kung sino malakas, yun ang mananalo.
Baka iba naman. Baka mas maraming magawa.
Is more power to local governments more power to the people? Elections, devolution, and the local government code 3 decades after. Bahagi ng #Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series. Hatid sa inyo ng UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor, Task Force Nation Building, ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies at ng Department of Political Science.
Okay, so thank you very much for to the DZUP for producing the video. Now we proceed to our actors. No, they will give their insights and comments to the presentations of our speakers for today. And first for today's webinar, Dr. Irma Sundi's their strength and local health system past 30 years. Hello. Hello, I'm sorry for that technical mishap. So so Dr. Asuncion worked for almost 20 years in the field, 13 years in clinical practice and hospital management, and 6 years in public health at the regional level before she was transferred to the DOH Central Office as the OIC Director 4 of the Health Promotion and Communication Services. She then became the Director 4 of the National Center for Disease Prevention and Control and of the Epidemiology Bureau. Given her experience in both hospital and public health practice, she is currently the Director 4 of the Bureau of Local Health Systems Development, the lead DOH Bureau in the formulation of policies, guidelines, and standards to strengthen local health systems. So let us welcome Dr. Asuncion to give her comments and insights.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Go. To our distinguished guests, presenters, and participants, a pleasant morning. So on behalf of our Undersecretary, Mario C. Villaverde, we would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for giving the DOH the chance to share our thoughts on the state of administration and delivery of public services at the local government level, specifically in terms of public health services. The enactment of RA number 7160 divided the governance of the Philippine public health care delivery system between the national government and the local government units. The DOH was mandated to set national policy directions, standards, and strategic health plans, while the LGUs were mandated to ensure availability of public health programs and primary and secondary health care to their constituents. Literature provides the arguments on why devolution is good. Devolution is poised to improve the quality and efficiency of service provision through better governance and more efficient resource allocation. Theory suggests that local government's proximity to citizens gives the people more influence over local officials, promotes productive competition among local governments, and alleviates corruption through fiscal transparency and accountability. On the other hand, devolution has its fair share of disadvantages. It may lead to a further fragmented and inefficient service delivery because of unclear assignment of functions among tiers of government. In the absence of a well-defined accountability framework, neither the policy managers nor citizens know which actor to hold responsible. Furthermore, the mismatch between the revenue-raising capacity and expenditure needs of the local governments undermine their capacity to discharge their function full and effectively. I will be providing my rejoinder on the presentation in two parts. Since we have to look into the performance of the LGUs to determine how they are faring in terms of administering and delivering the public services, the first part is on the state of administration and delivery of public services at the local government level, and the performance of local government based on their constitutional and other legal mandates to promote democratization and development. The second part will be on ERA, taxation, budgeting, and spending powers of LGUs since 1991. The devolution of health service provision was considered as an essential element in the implementation of primary health care, consistent with the oath's decentralization theorem that decentralization improves local health service delivery. Based on systematic review and summary of the extant knowledge on the impacts of decentralization on health in the Philippines by Abrigo et al. In 2017, it was found that there were indications of positive effects of decentralization when increasing government health expenditures and on health outcomes, particularly on nutrition, infant mortality, and healthcare demand. Consistently, the 2017 Philippine National Demographic and Health Survey results show that between 1993 and 2017, the infant mortality rate decreased from 34 deaths per 1,000 live births to 21 deaths per 1,000 live births, while the under 5 mortality rate decreased from 54 deaths to 27 deaths per 1,000 live births. There were also marked improvements in terms of access to and utilization of maternal health services, like the percentage of women receiving the antenatal care from a skilled health provider, which increased from 85% to 94%. Facility-based deliveries have nearly tripled from 28 to 78%, and the percentage of live births delivered by a skilled provider increased from 53 to 84%. It is important to note, however, that there is limited number of studies delving into the direct effects of devolution on health outcomes, specifically between health spending and health outcomes. In contrast, several literatures agree that after more than 25 years after the full implementation of RA 7160, the local government still experience issues and challenges on health devolution, especially in the areas of 1, health financing, service delivery, where disparities in access and quality of publicly provided health services and among LGUs and by the type of facility are apparent. Third is health personnel, where LGUs are unable to provide the mandated benefits of devolved health workers. And fourth, organizational structure leading to lack of technical coordination across the different levels of health system. The separation of supervision and control of primary care facilities and secondary or tertiary care facilities, which is referred to as technical fragmentation, and the administration of primary care facilities based on territorial jurisdiction of the LGU, led to weak patient referral and gatekeeping, difficulties in health information management, and low efficiency in public health spending, among others, which resulted in inefficiencies in basic service delivery. To mitigate the effects of devolution on health sector, Republic Act number 11223, or the Universal Healthcare Act, was enacted. The law aims to address the fragmentation of financing and the delivery of health services through the integration of the local health systems into the province-wide and citywide health systems, which will facilitate the continuous, coordinated, and integrated delivery of healthcare services and the creation of the Special Health Fund. We are currently in the process of piloting this reform in 58 provinces, highly urbanized cities, and independent component cities. And once proven to be effective in improving overall health outcomes, an executive order will be issued for its nationwide implementation by fiscal year 2026. I also would want to highlight the vital role of the private sector in complementing and augmenting the services rendered by the LGUs. And to further improve service delivery and systems operations, our LGUs have explored engaging the private sector. Several policies were actually issued, such as the DILG Memorandum Circular number 2016-120 on the guidelines on the implementation of the public-private partnership for the People Initiative for Local Governments, or the LGUP4, and the DILG PPP Center Joint Memorandum Circular number 2019-01 on the supplemental guidance for the implementation of the LGUP4 or joint venture agreements. So let me now proceed to the second part of the discussion, which is about the utilization of the ERA and taxation, budgeting, and spending powers of LGUs. After devolution, there were consistent concerns on health financing, which may be due to the mismatch between the LGU's internal revenue allotment and the cost of devolved functions, or the CODEF, which burden was also deemed inequitable across the different LGU levels. This was well evident in the inability of the fifth and the sixth class LGUs to sustain the quality of health services. Hopefully, these issues will be addressed by the increase in the national tax allotment, formerly known as the Internal Revenue Allotment, which, based on the estimates of the Department of Finance, or the DOF, will increase the share of the LGUs by 27% starting fiscal year 2020, following the Supreme Court ruling on the Mandanas et al. And Garcia petition. Moreover, the implementation of the Executive Order number 138 on the full devolution further highlighted the delineation of functions and financings of services between LGUs and NGAs. Concerned national government agencies, including the DOH, were mandated to draft the devolution transition plan for fiscal year 2020 to fiscal year 2024 to facilitate the smooth transfer of accountabilities. One of the critical challenges we foresee is ensuring that the LGUs are well capacitated to manage the increase in local funds. Public financial management, trainings, including local planning, investment programming, resource mobilization, and budgeting is crucial in achieving the allocative and technical efficiencies. Furthermore, because of the local fiscal autonomy, we are still unsure whether the local governments will really prioritize health, or will they shift spending to less costly LGU priorities. DOH is continuously engaging our local chief executives and other local stakeholders on the importance of investing on the health system. In closing, the impact of the devolution of our health services may be summarized by looking at the case of the Philippine COVID-19 pandemic response. The health crisis highlighted the importance of having a resilient health system wherein comprehensive and continuous health services are delivered, a clear accountability framework among health sectors, health actors is present, and a strategic allocation of resources is being practiced. Like any other reforms, the devolution of health services has its share of advantages and disadvantages. But given the new policies and legislation in place to strengthen its implementation, we are positive that we will be able to maximize the gains and minimize the bottlenecks. Given all the points that I have cited, I would like to leave a challenge for everyone listening here today to ponder on how can I help in improving local administration, management, and delivery of health services. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asuncion, for providing us an insight from the public health sector. Now we proceed to our second reactor for today's webinar, Dr. Eduardo Climacotaden, who is the convener of the Program on Alternative Development of the University of the Philippines Center for Integrative and Development Studies and Professorial Lecturer of Asian Studies at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He has a doctoral degree in Southeast Asian Studies from the National University of Singapore. He is a retired professor of Asian Studies in the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he served as editor-in-chief of Asian Studies Journal. He has been active in several progressive civil society and social movements. He has 142 publications in books, academic journals, and periodicals on various political, economy, and social issues. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Eduardo Climacotaden.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you very much to the organizers of this webinar on local governments and power to the people. I note, of course, the three highly qualified speakers who just presented. The more optimistic assessment by Dr. Alex Brillantes, the more neutral assessment by Dr. Joseph Capuno, and the more pessimistic assessment from Dr. Ella Atienza. So let me now just share some notes that I have put together preparation for this webinar. Philippine decentralization's objectives are twofold. Number one, to end the Metro Manila-centered patronage tradition and shift power to local officials outside the metropolis. Number two, and more important, to empower people from below via their participation in the development process, in the decision-making processes, particularly in the delivery of social services. In theory, decentralization opens windows through which democratic spaces can be developed and enlarged to confront centralized elite power. This has been mandated by the 1991 Local Government Code, which gave local governments the authority over public works, health services, social welfare and development, and even on agriculture, and even on the implementation of agrarian reform. The code also encourages the participation of people's organizations and non-government organizations in local government processes, development councils, and special bodies as a counterfoil to entrenched elite interests. Popular participation in decision-making at the local levels, however, is crippled and paralyzed by the long-term presence of political dynasties which have dominated and monopolized political power at all levels of government. I will not dwell on this because this has been referred to already by the speakers. Secondly, popular participation and meaningful decentralization are also seriously impaired by the country's high levels of social inequality. Again, I will not dwell on this further. The Philippines has one of the highest, if not the highest rates of social inequality in Asia, according to the World Bank's recent estimates based on the Gini index. But for me, the really major stumbling block to decentralization is the existence of national policies determined by the central authority, and foremost of this is the privatization of social services. Privatization is part of a threefold neoliberal development policy of liberalization and deregulation, that is, significantly reducing the role of the state in society and supposedly leveling the field by allowing market forces to reign supreme. But in a highly unequal society where the field is far from level, the initiative and resulting benefits would inevitably be seized by elite sectors with political and economic resources. The global economic crisis in the 1980s resulted in governments relying on privatization for economic development and the delivery of public services. This was in accordance with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund conditionalities and prescriptions in return for loan packages. Privatization was meant to, one, reduce the extent of government's involvement in business. Number two, promote competition, efficiency, and productivity. Number three, stimulate private entrepreneurship. And number four, avoid the monopolies and bureaucracies of government-run agencies. Economist Jomo Kwame Sundaram, however, maintains that the promise of privatization remains unfulfilled. Privatization has failed to stimulate private entrepreneurship and investment as economic assets are diminished and diverted to take over state-owned enterprises. Not only do private funds become less available for investing in the real economy, as opposed to the financial and services economy, he says, opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises are also crowded out. Sundaram notes that since a significant portion of state-run activities are public monopolies, privatization will simply create new private-run monopolies. And since private interests are only interested in profitable or potentially profitable enterprises, the government will be saddled with unprofitable and less profitable activities. Long-term investments are thus sacrificed in favor of short-term profits. Privatization also results in inequalities in the delivery of services. One for those who can afford more costly private, including privatized services, and the other for those who cannot, and hence have to continue to rely on subsidized public services. Lastly, Sundaram argues that privatization in many developing and transition economies frequently breed patronage and corruption, enriching a few with strong political connections, while the public interest is increasingly sacrificed to such powerful private business interests. Neoliberalism is basically concerned with growth and less with equity. An important end goal of responsible governance, however, is to bring about equitable development and universal access to essential public services. Privatization, however, in the midst of socioeconomic inequalities, only aggravates the lack of access to essential public services. In this situation, the interests of marginalized sectors are neglected. Privatization in delivering needed public goods has been at the expense of the consumers in terms of higher rates for water and electricity. The historical roots of the problem can be traced to the country's colonial experience. Development was focused on Manila, thus creating dependency relations with the periphery. The Manila Center usurped the resources of the provinces, creating unequal growth and unequal development, and impoverishing the periphery. This would later constitute a major obstacle to decentralization. Additionally, the framework for responsible and equitable governance is informed by the ideals of human rights, that is, the right of the people to access basic needs like housing, water, and electricity. The human right to water, for example, has been asserted by the United Nations General Assembly and the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, or UNCESCR. Part of the neoliberal agenda is the strategy of public-private partnerships, or PPP. In an unequal society, however, the private in the partnership is represented generally by big corporations and conglomerates. In the Philippines water privatization experience, this is exemplified by the dominance of conglomerate-owned Manila Water Corporation and Maynilad Water. The public, on the other hand, as represented by regulatory bodies like the MWSS, is only too willing to let the private dictate the whole process. Thus, the 20-year Philippine experience with water privatization in the Metro Manila and surrounding provinces area has only bred the following serious problems. Number one, the rising price of water, leading to inequality and class bias, excessive profit-taking beyond allowable limits. Number three, inadequate and unreliable coverage, particularly for the urban poor areas, poor water sanitation and wastewater treatment services, the increase of non-revenue water, inefficient management, as reflected in underspending as well as in irregular and sometimes even corrupt practices, the non-involvement or diminished role of local government units and the local community in general, workers' welfare and issues of unemployment, the use of public funds for water privatization, and the general weakness of the regulatory process leading to regulatory capture. There is therefore a need to explore how to mobilize grassroots communities towards linking up with like-minded local officials to assert public control of essential services and contain the privatization push. Such efforts would require linking grassroots communities with other social movements and civil society organizations. Only a community empowered from below can make those in power accountable. In terms of an alternatives to privatization at the local level, there has been a huge surge actually in what is called deprivatization and or remunicipalization. And this has been a popular alternative. And that implies returning public services back to government and specifically local governments. And this involves public ownership, public management, and democratic control that is transparent and accountable. And these have been documented worldwide by the Transnational Institute based in Amsterdam. There have been 835 successful remunicipalization cases in 45 countries, of which 267 were in the water sector and in 37 countries, which benefit more than 100 million people. These experiences of remunicipalization show existing and viable public ownership of water services and success in preventing privatization. The key here, however, or the keys is cooperation between citizens' movements, public officials, water service workers, and communities, and guided by the values of participation, empowerment, equity, accountability, quality or safety, efficiency, transparency, solidarity, and replicability. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tadem, for the insights, especially on privatization and the issue surrounding this area. Now, we proceed to the open forum, and we have seen that our participants have actively raised several questions in our Q&A chat box, and we are, our organizers are compiling them together so we can have a more organized and systematic way of handling the question and answer segment of this webinar. And to start the ball rolling, we have several questions here that we would like to pose to our presenters. The first question came from Carl Emmanuel Ruiz. The question is, what are the other ways to increase the local income sources of municipalities with limited infrastructure, few natural resources, and conflict-prone areas, if the proposed reforms for the IRA NTA formula to reduce the imbalances would face strong resistance in Congress? So that's the first question. The second question we have is to Professors Brillantes and Capuno. What do you think is the best way to resolve the conflict between the national government and the LGUs with the full implementation of the Mandanas ruling, and what would be its impact in connection to the implementation of the universal healthcare law and public education? So we would like to request our speakers to please limit, or our panelists to kindly limit their answers between 2 to 3 minutes only. So may we ask our panelists to please respond to the question? Yeah. Who should respond first? Maybe.
Alex, lead the way.
Oh, okay.
I was waiting for our moderator.
Yeah.
Okay, very quickly lang. You know what? The enabling framework is there already. Nandiyan yung local government code. And we have some good practices. I'm glad that Ed said I'm optimistic, but I'd say I'm realistically optimistic. Okay, we've seen some local governments float bonds. We've seen some local governments build, operate, transfer. Public-private. Nakita yung Mandaluyong, nakita yung sa Guimaras. You know, the point is to raise resources. They do it, and we all know agkurang ti kwarta, money is not enough. I've heard that from Senator Pimentel a million times. That's why local governments have to be a little more entrepreneurial, and some of them have done that. Okay, so some have floated bonds, like I said, public-private. You've seen Mandaluyong, the market in Dingras, you know. And some of them have been galing winners. I'm not romanticizing them, okay, guys? I'm not, definitely not. All I'm saying is, given the limitations, they were able to do it. Conflict as regards the Mandanas case, tama si Kwan eh. You know, like I said earlier, hey, Mandanas is good. But before we all start jumping, ay, may pera, sandali lang po, maglanding tayo ng konti. Is the money enough? You talk to LGUs. Pare ko, you talk to some LGUs, especially the lower class LGUs, ilipat sa kanila yung pagbabayad ng senior citizen, more than 50% na. Okay, ilipat sa kanila yung health, may mandated health. Andito si Dr. Asuncion, meron yung tawag na Magna Carta for Health. Kapag ililipat sa kanila, talo na sila. Infrastructure, ilipat sa kanila yung pagbabayad ng mga irrigation. Pero hindi lilipat yung pera. Sandali lang, mag-usap muna tayo. So that's where, I guess, we are now in the transition. And as pointed out by Dukoy kanina, looking at the pare 3 years hence, walang pera pare ko. You know, because we did not collect money because of the pandemic. We all know that. People that pay taxes now. Mababang business collection natin. So what we're saying, siguro, I don't know, the Supreme Court, siguro paliban ng konti yan. But at the same time, no, I agree na yung, and we've said this a million times na pare, yung, I'll shut up, but very important, yung sa IRA na nabanggit ni Ella, no? You know what? For the longest time, we have computed era population land area equal share. Sandali lang po. For the longest time, I'm saying, that just made the sea level rise for everybody. So let's introduce poverty. I've said that. Let's introduce performance. Okay, and I think I've talked to Chat Manasan, the experts in terms, especially of course in the Doko, how can we do that? And if the economists will do that, but it is important. It's important. Why should Makati? Why should Quezon City be entitled to era pare? That's ridiculous. We're using the same formula. So yes, we're moving, but at the same time, I'll shut up after this. It is evolving. It is evolving. So we can't expect things overnight. Kaya sabi ni Ed, I'm optimistic. Yes, we have to be optimistic sa tingin ko lang. Kasi nandyan. But at the same time, have a realistic picture of what we see. Okay? So I don't know. But I get passionate when it comes to this. But it's something that all of us are passionate, of course. But it's something that I think we continue, kaya tayo sa UP, we continue to debate. Sorry pare, it was a bit too long.
Yeah, it's fine, sir. Thank you for your passionate response. How about Dr. Capuno?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this on and off, but for a long time already. Yeah. So let's look at real property taxes, for example, as a case in point. Yeah, that's in many countries that's the principal source of local government revenues. But in the Philippines, it's under collected. It's not used very well. So to improve the tax collections on real properties, yeah. So you ask a question: what would be the solution? How would you approach the solution? So I think there are two parts to the complete solution. One is the technical. One is the, shall we say, political economy thing. The technical solution is that we capacitate, train the local governments how to do the assessments properly. Yeah, but will they actually do it? That's the political economy question. Yeah, it's not that they don't know how to, but sometimes they cannot say no to their tax base. Pag nilapitan sila, huwag mo na ako i-tax mayor, o i-under-assess mo lang, o ganito, or ganito. That's what they cannot say no to. Yeah, the training, capacitating is easily done. The DILG, DLGF has been doing this, yeah, training and undertaking. But when it comes to actually doing it, will they do it? That's a political economy question. That's the harder part. So the way I'm thinking about is that, well, one way to do that is to remove the decision from their control. For example, DLGF saying, oh, every 3 years you should submit an updated tax assessment. So it doesn't become political anymore. They have to comply. Yeah. So that's this part of the solution. The technical assistance and all that training, that's easy. Saying no to their constituents who are going to be adversely affected by revised tax schedules and all that is what they need to that's the help where they need it most. Yeah, that's it. I think the complete solution is both technical and political economy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Capun. Dr. Atienza, do you have?
Thank you, Rob. Just very briefly, because the question is there's one question about how do we encourage development and resource generation in areas, in poor areas, particularly areas that have been, conflict-prone areas. I think in this case, at least based on limited case studies that we have been collecting and we have been involved in, actually, as I mentioned earlier, together with Rob and other UP faculty who have been involved in a 3-year project on rehabilitation of areas affected by Typhoon Yolanda in the Visayas, and one of our colleagues also, Dennis Kilala, has been working on conflict affected areas and people on the ground. What we have seen that may be helpful in terms of recovery, particularly economic recovery, and later on, possibly if successful, can be sources of revenue not only for people, but also for the locality would be more localized, community-based initiatives with the assistance of international, local, and government agencies. We've seen cases in Eastern Visayas where there were a lot of top-down community economic development assistance, and most of them failed because people were not asked, people were not organized, and inputs of people were not asked. But we have a few cases, particularly in Tacloban, where they integrated housing and livelihood, and the people organized themselves with the assistance of several international and local organizations, and they were able to establish a community credit system, a small store, which are also now thriving, and mainly because people were involved, and they continue to be involved, and they make many of the stakeholders accountable. And this is also the some of the findings of our colleague Assistant Professor Dennis Kilala in the areas that he studied, which are conflict prone or recovering from conflict. Many of the economic development initiatives did not succeed because the inputs of the communities were not asked. So the more successful ones, even small, modest ones that are thriving, are the ones where we see community organizations participating in livelihood, in making sure that housing and other basic services are actually working, even in areas that have been affected by crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the highlight is to involve the citizens more in the local government activities to make it more.
Jan, if I might just jump in, that's so true. We did the documentation with LGA. I don't know, LFU, you've seen this, no? You know, we don't have to wait for national government. Mataogan Peace Council in Kalinga. You have local governments that on their own declared their places peace zones. We forget national. And they were citing international documents. They declared it peace zone. Bawal pumasok ang militar, bawal pumasok, ang communist. But it's work. We have them. Marami sa Mindanao nag-declare ng peace zone, even at the barangay level. So you're so right. Let's not wait for national government. If the people are tired, take things into their hands. End of story. And of course, we also use the existing mechanisms that are already there, even without the law. I mean, I just mentioned Mataogan Peace Council, Council of Elders, Bodong. We're not romanticizing this, but it's there. So tama yung sabi mo na, let the people do it themselves. National government can help. That's fine. But there is that framework. Okay, they declared peace zones. I know of some places that have declared peace zones because everybody was just so tired. And to settle this, you have the Council of Elders. I know I visited Tabuk and Kalinga. So I'm from there. We talked about that, and it's worth the money, but not to romanticize. Definitely not. But you are so right about the existence, the principle of involving them, or equally important, the people themselves taking up. Kaya sa tingin ko, alam mo, if we quote unquote complain that people are not involved, you know what? Get involved. End of story. If they're not calling the meeting, attend the meeting. How many of us in this room have attended the barangay council meeting? I challenge us. In the code, we're supposed to. Okay, how many of us have gone there? Mga nag-attend, matiga, mga nasa quote unquote informal, mga nasa subdivision hindi sumasali. Well, then let's go. I attended these meetings. At one sense, we cannot always blame them. We ourselves should get involved. We should demand our right. Kaya nga meron tayong mga charter. Pag naghihintay tayong tawagin, pag hinintay natin tawagin ng kapitan, hindi tayo tatawagin yan. But not all of them are like that naman. But ang point ko dito, we have to assert ourselves. The enabling framework is there. It might be limited, as you pointed out, medyo manipis, pero nandyan.
Thank you very much for that intervention. Now, we have several more questions here. First one, do you think CACG guided LGUs for real good government despite the cycle of repeats of problems like, for example, political war, political dynasties, and rampant corruption? And then the other question here is, I think this is pushing forward in terms of the Constitution and the source of the tax base. No, do you recommend an amendment on the economy and patrimony provisions of the 1987 Constitution, like scrapping the 60-40 Filipino foreign equity ownership cap and allow 100% FDI participation, just to increase the tax base of the national and local governments? Okay, so maybe we can first ask Dr. Atienza, and then
Okay, thank you for that question. Actually, there are many sources in the local government code of local income. Okay, it's not just taxation, but there are also other fees, and then of course you can also enter into agreements and then investments. In terms of ownership, foreign ownership, we've heard this very prominent. This almost stopped the deliberations in the 1986 CONCON, yung 60-40 sa ownership. And then of course, before the pandemic hit, DILG was leading the interagency task force on amendments to the Constitution. One of the areas that were being pushed, because some of the leagues were actually pushing for this, to relax or to liberalize certain provisions in the Constitution regarding the 60-40 ownership, and to also encourage, to liberalize or to open up to foreign investments and ownership, some areas that are currently nationalized, like media, what else? Agriculture and education, even higher education. But I think as a result of the pandemic, because the need to recover, to also help our local economy, the momentum has sort of stopped. Although we need to talk more about this, because of course there are implications regarding further liberalizing and opening up our economy, now that yes, we need money, we need resources, both national and local, but at the same time also what will happen to our basic sectors that have already been affected by liberalization and opening up. And then of course, because of the pandemic, there's a lot of unemployment. So I think there's a need to rethink this. Although before the pandemic, I think the position of the DILG on this is that they do not want agriculture to be open up for foreign ownership. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Atienza. Dr. Brillantes.
You mentioned CCAGG.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, Dr. Brillantes.
Okay, kasi nabanggit mo yung CCAGG, concerns for good governance. You know, it was a very good program. We were also part of that at one point, but it's not that easy. You know, the lawyer was killed. I mean, you know, but ang point ko rito is the experience of concerned citizens apart from good governance has been used as an example of, you know, encouraging people to participate, you know, sticking your neck out, and they do that, right? Okay. Number two, yung tax base na sinasabi ni Dukoy, alam mo, at one point, not to romanticize, I've said that a million times, but not to romanticize, alam mo pare, we can learn from them. I know of one local government, okay, hindi sila makapag-collect ng real property. Anong ginawa nila? Every time nagkakaroon tayo ng fiesta pare. So they gathered all the beauty contestants, if you may. Di ba lahat tayo may fiesta? You would think beauty contestant is not related to real property. It is. So they gathered all of them, and when they ran for naging to be beauty queen, you know, whatever that is, you know what they did? What they do usually, we ask, we solicit. What they said, why don't you go out, tell the people to pay their business tax, real property tax? That's very true, and it's being replicated. It was taught by the local wisdom. And it's being done now. Okay? So sila mismo. And the third part, yung sinabi mo pa rin sa tungkol sa opening up, you know, I'll just give my example, no, in Chad. We are in UP, okay? Si Ed, you studied in NUS, pare ko. A big number of our faculty, a big number of the students that are foreigners. In UP, how many are there? Okay, that's one. Number two, when I was dean, I wanted to bring a professor from a good university to teach. You know what? I had problems with immigration. I had problems with labor. I had problems with even us in the faculty na ay naku, madidistort ang ating ecology. What's going on here? Sa akin pare, I would go against predatory globalization. But hey, in this day and age. My daughter just came from NUS, like you know, and you know, when I went there for graduation last time, and I studied in Hawaii, you know, the internationalization. But because of our laws, if you may, we work against ourselves. So a little, but I would go against predatory globalization, as my good friend Farasman would say, naman. So my experience speaks for itself. Now in UP, okay, we might be ranking, but how many of our faculty are from? You know this, Jan. You're the Rob. They call you Rob.
Okay.
And that's frustrating.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Capuno, do you have anything to add on the question?
Yeah. I think we emphasize too much the NTA era. We sustain the narrative na you know, we should get a higher share from the era NTA. When in fact, as I was saying, you know, there is an untapped revenue potential. Yeah, tax revenues, non-tax revenues, local. Of course, not all local governments would be equally rich in terms of potential resources, but we're not tapping this. So quite apart from the era, which is, you know, a separate issue, there is a huge pot of gold on which they're sitting, which are not digging up for their own good. I think at saka ano the era originally is intended to ensure that local governments would have some minimum resources. It's not designed to solve all financing problems of local governments. You need different kind of financing schemes for those different kinds of financing problems. Some would be, you know, incentive-based or performance-based, so forth and so on. Ang IRA, kaya lang siya naging importante kasi siya yung napakalaki. Halos naubos na yung pera for other financing schemes. Yeah, it's so, ang nangyayari dahil malaki siya, we're trying to, you know, fix all problems using the IRA, when in fact it's not really designed for that. And quite apart from that, there is a pot of gold on which some local governments are sitting on, and yet they're not digging up. I don't know for whatever reason, perhaps technical, perhaps political, so forth and so on. That's the other, you know, that's the other solution that we should be thinking of. Yeah.
Okay, very quick, pasensya ka na. Yung kasi Dukoy pare, we have to look at many of our LGUs are not exactly viable. That's why I talk about the importance of, at one point, political will amalgamation. So many of our LGUs are not viable. 90% era dependent. I've even seen one LGU 100% era dependent. Saan ka nakita ng ganon? So we should talk about amalgamation. It's painful, but we should talk about that. I've discussed it with people at the LG. Maybe begin amalgamation at the barangay level, but all the way up. I mean, it's not a popular question, and it's something that should be done right after elections.
I agree with you that. I agree with you on that, Alex. I agree. We should also thinking about amalgamation.
Maybe that's one study that CIDS can do now para it can be part of the agenda for local governments right after the elections, where we swallow the bitter pill right after elections. Kasi before elections, tiguran upakan tayo nun. But it's still something that's long term because we have too many LGUs in this country today. No, especially at the barangay. Like I said, you bite the bullet sa barangay. Para sa akin, let's convert them to administrative units. But that's where you, pare, the economists would really come in. You're the experts, pare. But definitely fragmentation is a problem.
Okay, thank you.
A slight trivia for information of everybody. So when I was working on this paper, I was looking at the local governments in Maguindanao. Yeah. So in Maguindanao, from 20 to 36 in a span of 1 year, ang in-increase ng local governments. I mean, it can only be explained by, you know, by era, you know, getting more money. 16. How can you justify that?
And some of them are 100% era dependent. What's going on here?
So Alex is right. Yeah, parang it's crazy how, you know, if you justify that based on land area and population, land area has not increased. It remains fixed. Population could not increase by 36% over a year's time to justify, you know, more LGUs. So it's crazy.
Thank you very much. To our reactors.
Yes, Rob, if I may.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please. Yes, please.
By the way, in this issue of increasing foreign equity to 100% from the existing 60-40, And supposedly, as far as local governments go, in order to increase their, taxes. But foreign investors, especially multinational corporations, are notorious for being the worst tax evaders in the world. They are very good at this of evading taxes by utilizing a lot of mechanics, transfer pricing, horizontal production, etc., etc. So I wouldn't put too much weight on increasing on this particular amendment to the constitution, which is being proposed by the legislature and also by the government. And secondly, I also don't know what the fuss is all about, because even with 40% equity in a local corporation, a foreign investor can already control the corporation. It can control it because it has the access to the markets, and secondly, it has the technology. So those two factors alone, even if you have 40, 30, 20, or even 10% equity in a corporation, you are able to control and make the decisions that matter for that particular corporation. So I don't see what the fuss is all about. But in any case, the University of the Philippines Diliman University Council has already made a statement on this, opposing by almost 90% of the council, supporting a statement that opposes this amendment to the Constitution and bringing in 100% foreign equity. Another point I would like to mention, however, which I failed to mention in my presentation, is that a strong factor that really limits or even inhibits popular participation in local governments is the issue of militarization. The militarization of Philippine society, which has been becoming more rampant under the Duterte administration, is a huge impediment and a barrier to popular participation at the local government level. Popular organizations through peasant organizations, community organizations, and even workers' organizations are being harassed, intimidated, and in many cases, in some cases, their leaders are being killed, and also red tagged if they so much as express dissent, if they so much as express sentiments that go against the prevailing dominant position of the governments, both at the national and local level. So, this situation of increasing militarization, red tagging by the government at all levels has also to be addressed, because it will really go against the intent of popular participation as mandated by the local government codes.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Tadem, for the intervention. We have a few more questions here on the table. First is, will devolution to having a higher budget improve the governance and delivery of social services in laggard LGUs? I think this is a big question. How do we know if an LGU is doing well or not? And what is the M&E for this? Another set of questions asks something related to the expectations, with the IRA. So was the expected IRA due to the projected recovery of the Philippine economy by 2022, or has the tax capabilities of LGUs gradually became better? We also have this question: do you think that some, I think this is for Dr. Capuno, do you think that some non-tax revenue sources are unethical, like the garbage collection fees or other fees in general, other fees for availing of government services? And then finally, to access more the social services, can you share some of the best practices in empowering the LGU communities to link them much more strongly to the LGU? So it's the sets of questions are quite rich, but it's basically asking about the impact of higher budget on services, social services, particularly in LGUs which are not able to respond to these responsibilities at the current state. Okay, so who would like to first go the ball rolling? Response, probably Dr. Brillantes. Then we have Dr. Atienza and then Dr. Capuna for a specific question addressed to
Thank
him.
you.
Yeah, yes,
Kaya
yes,
nga
sir.
at one point, for the longest time, the debate was our internal revenue allotment formula was not exactly the best. In fact, I asked Tatay Nene, but Tatay Nene and Pimentel, but they were quote unquote rushing. But at the same time, there's a provision that we should amend the code or review it every 5 years. Did it happen? It did not. All of us around the room were involved in several studies, our RFAs, etc., etc. But number 3, that's what we talk about redoing the formula in terms of, I've said this kanina, introducing poverty, introducing performance. And I think it's very important, very important. So yung laggard LGUs within the context of equity, na, like I said, why should Quezon City, etc., Makati have access to this? Kaya nga, at one point, maganda sana yung growth equity fund natin. But of course, since meron tayong pandemic, hindi ko alam kung it can happen at this point in time. But we can use that growth equity fund and talagang i-target natin yung mga mas mahirap yung laggard LGUs sa question ng Don who raised the question. And number 2, at one point, I think looking at from a long historical sweep, maybe decentralization, seen from a historical perspective, would say that at one point we were highly centralized. Okay, then we went to the pendulum. We went to the extreme of super decentralized. Come on, including elections sa mga kabataang barangay. I mean, we went all the way, and I think it's now time for us to rethink. And the whole discourse, even in other parts of the world, including Latin America, is now they're rethinking decentralization. Baka nasobran natin lahat. And you all know that this whole force towards decentralization is really part of the governance agenda of USAID, the World Bank. All of us have been involved here. But how do we? Okay, so I think there's shall we move back in the pendulum? Perhaps we should. Sa health, in fact, I was going to ask Dr. Irma about this. Alam natin, sir, ang dami na centralized mga hospital, even in agriculture, that kind of thing. So maybe it might be time for us to take an honest to goodness look and be open to not romanticizing. Siguro pwedeng mag-centralize kasi nasobran natin sa pendulum, baka kailan bumalik ng konti. And 30 years is a rich experience. Our studies, I think, marami tayong mahuhugot dyan, especially in the field of health. As sabi nga ni Ma'am kanina, na-fragmentize natin masyado. And that's why you've had a slew of hospitals being renationalized. Okay? And we can learn from the lessons from health and agriculture also. But social services, that's something we look at. Thank you. Thank you,
Dr.
Rob.
Brillante. Yes. Does maybe Dr. Asuncion has any intervention on that, because on the matter of health, perhaps?
Sinabi mo. Okay, thank you for that question. So, just to repeat, is the devolution, what has it done in terms of health services? So, based on the study of Abrigo, they were already they were able to show that there were positive effects that relate increasing the budget to increasing the government, the health expenditures. And however, there's still a room for the improvement. For example, a clearer accountability framework, matching them with revenue raising capacity and expenditure needs. So pag mayroon na tayong Mandanas ruling, this will really increase, as I've mentioned already by other speakers, the fiscal space of the LGUs to scale up the implementation as well of the health reforms. So, for example, yung ating UHC. So, kung titingnan natin, in addition po, doon po sa ating National Expenditure Program for the 2022 budget, Section 85 was also mentioned there that the PS cap of the LGUs are waived as long as the money that will be the money will really be spent on the salaries, benefits, and incentives for health workers. So nandun na po siya sa NEP. Although nasa NEP pa lang siya, wala pa po siya. So we still have to wait for the General Appropriation Act. And then in addition din po, if we talk about the devolution, based doon sa amin devolution transition plan, kasi sunod-sunod na po ito from the Mandanas to the devolution. The DOH has came up with categorizing the different health facilities. Kasi we're talking now yung problema talaga sa facilities, problema sa tao. And then so ang facilities ngayon, kinategorize nila whether there is low capacity but what high gap. So ito yung mga nasa GIDA areas, ito yung mga nasa poor municipalities. So ito yung mariretain sa DOH and they will be prioritized na meron na silang number of facilities that have to be improved, to be constructed. So nakaano na po siya na retained in the Department of Health, and then mayroon pong madi-divulge siya beginning 2022 for those areas na mayroon high capacity pero low gap. So mayroon na po kaming categorization for that na including the number of facilities for the province, for each city, and for its municipality. Tapos, na-mention na rin po, it has been mentioned about the Growth Equity Fund na based on the shared by the DILG, may na-identify na po sila na 16 provinces, 17 cities, and 259 municipalities na makikinabang po doon sa Growth Equity Fund. Ang basis nito is because of the EO 138 or yung ating devolution about the devolution. This GEF is really based on poverty incidence of the area as well as the per capita and the NTA based on the 2020 census. So mayroon na pong amount na parang naka-ano na dyan identified. Parang it will really parang talagang kailangan maging equalize or maging there is equity among the being a poor LGU and those who are may kaya. And then na-mention din po kanina about M&E para malaman natin how do we know that the LGU is doing well or how the LGU is not doing well. So on the part of the Department of Health, meron kaming yung LGU Health Scorecard. And then this year for the 2022, assessing the 2020 status, naisama na po namin ang indicators ng aming LGU Health Scorecard with the yung SGLG. So we are working closely with the ILG para po maging maging harmonized po siya. So that's one way of yung para makita namin na how are they doing well and how parang ganun. Although pag sinabi natin parang nirarank lang sila and then there's incentive for them if we look into the SGLG. So yun lang po ang aking kasi ang ating LGU scorecard kasi mayroon siyang indicators for governance. There are also indicators on service delivery. So yun po. And health financing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asuncion, for that intervention. It's actually an additional insight, and I'm particularly interested because you will have redevolution at a certain point in time after getting back.
Ask her a question.
Addressing the gap. Huh?
May I ask a question kay Dr. Irma? yung kwan po, ma'am, yung mga decentralized hospital, because that's a very, very strong indicator, ma'am, na sobrang natin devolution, siguro how many have actually been decentralized. And I think that's very important because that relates to this whole notion of capacity, not only of the local, but also national. Number two question that I would like to ask, ma'am. I was listening one time to the president in his cabinet meeting, and he was signing laws, but some of the laws were signed, increasing the bed capacity of this hospital, increasing the bed capacity of this. I mean, what's going on? Does it take the president to increase the bed capacity? Yeah. This is so true, pare. Maraming mga ari ganyan. So I said that's also an indication of too much centralization, if you may. But at the same time, so may mga hugot po ito. But should it take the president to pass sign a Republic Act in front of the people to increase the bed capacity of a small hospital somewhere in La Union, you know. So it's still something that we should do. But of course, it relates now to the whole notion of capacity. So my question kanina, ma'am, kasi marami rin tayong mga nag-recentralize ng hospital kasi hindi nila kaya, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Sir, thank you po, Professor Dr. Alex po. Kung tama pagkaintindi ko, kasi itong mga renationalized hospitals, either you are renationalized, there is increase in bed capacity, or if constructing a new hospital, this goes into the Congress and filed as a law, and these are LGU initiated. So pagdating po doon, kung very powerful po ang Congress, yun po doon po nagkakaroon ng negotiation, even though how much the DOH would say that dapat kayo na po yan, sometimes there's really an issue on whether dapat ba o hindi. Yung binigay sa amin na data by the DBM, mayroon ngayon there are 318 bills that are filed sa Congress, renationalization of devolved functions. And out of these 318, there are 111 for the renationalization of local hospitals. At ang nakita po kasi nila, parang lang ho talaga dapat sabihin an eye-opener for all our LGUs. Now, out of the 111 na bills for renationalization of local hospitals, 91% are in the cities na first to third income class. And kung titingnan natin, if with the Mandanas ruling, dapat po makakayanan na po nila na to run the hospital. So although there are issues about really the capacity of the local government unit to manage a hospital, pero magagawa naman ng paraan yun na there's a need to provide technical assistance for hospital management, it can be done. But if these hospitals are really under the high income, low poverty incidence, dapat hindi na po sila maibigay sa central government. Yun po.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Asuncion. So it's still a subject then of the politics in Congress. Yeah. So Dr. Atienza, do you have anything to add, particularly on the questions of social services?
Of course, based on case studies and comparisons, increasing the budget will not automatically increase performance, particularly in terms of delivering better services or more equitable services. That's why it's important to really, particularly now that all the stakeholders, the agencies like the Department of Health, they're preparing the devolution, as mentioned by Dr. Asuncion, they have the devolution transition plan. It's important to really be very clear who will be responsible for certain services, where are the areas that need coordination and intergovernmental cooperation. Capacity is important, both at the national and local governments. In terms of specific budgeting, prioritization is important, but it's because health is of course the most affected by the 1991 local government code. It's good that we can probably propose to really have a special health fund, as mentioned by Dr. Asuncion, because if we will not have if we will not really mandate LGUs to spend on health, then we will encounter the problems that have been highlighted. These have been going on, but they have been highlighted as a result of the pandemic. I think in terms of best practices, we can, of good service delivery, we have quite a lot already. Nasa website naman, sir, ng galing po, Sir Alex, di ba? There are mini videos of successful cases, and at the same time also the UP Center for Women and Gender Studies actually is on its third year. They have this Angat Bayi program where they train women local government officials to be, not because it's important not only to have more women in local government positions, we need them to, of course, be more proactive in terms of supporting more participatory, more equitable service delivery. And they have actually mentors, successful women leaders, and many of them have already, there are already 3 batches. They already have a wealth of initiatives focusing not only on women but other sectors, particularly for LGBTQ, basic service delivery for out of school youth, for of course programs for poorer communities. It's unfortunate that we cannot have Mayor Crisel here. Maybe we wanted to also have her here because even before the CBMS law became a law, her Tabaco City has been pioneering the use of CBMS in terms of really planning and budgeting for areas that should really be prioritized, including health services and other basic services. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Atienza. And Dr. Caputo, there are questions about IRA, expected IRA projections and non-tax revenue sources being unethical. Do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, and I also have something to add on the health aspect.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so first on the ethical question, yeah. Well, there are many philosophical bases for government decision. Ethics is just one of them. Equity is another. Efficiency is another. Social justice is another. Okay, but let's focus on the ethics part. What is ethical, I think, is that everybody should pay taxes if they can and they are required to. Yeah, and those who will benefit more from government should pay more. But the fact is that not everybody pays taxes. Yeah. And then not all services are equally pare-parehong gastos. Health services in the tertiary hospital is more expensive than the health services in the primary hospital. So why should you pay the same for the same type of for different types of services? The ethical thing to do is that when you cost the government more, you pay more. Yeah, assuming that you can. Yeah. So the purpose of the non-tax revenues is to address that issue. Okay, so it's actually an ethical response to the inequities of taxes. Yeah, quite apart from what is happening really in reality, but in principle, the philosophical basis is that to address the inequities arising from taxes. That's the purpose of the non-tax revenues. I hope that's clear. Kasi kung minsan masyadong philosophically loaded, we miss the big picture. Okay, so dito naman sa expected IRA is primarily due to the projected recovery of the Philippine economy. I don't understand this actually. The IRA or the NTA that the government, that the LGUs will receive in 2022 is based on the tax collection in 2019. Okay, so when the economy recovers in 2022, hopefully, LGUs won't enjoy their share in the tax collections until 2024. Or 2025. So it's too far off into the picture to see what's going to happen there. Now, on the second part of the question, has tax capabilities of the LGUs gradually become better? Probably, I don't know. But the analysis that I presented is that holding, what it means, because it's a regression, yeah, holding tax capabilities constant, controlling for that. What would an additional era do? So it's the effect on the margin. It's not, there are a lot of things why local governments can generate. But what I'm asking is, controlling for all of those other things, what would an extra money from IRA or NTA do? That's all. Okay. And then on the devolution of health services, this is a huge topic. Tama si Alex. We swung from one end to the other end. Yeah, we devolved, I would call, too much. And the DOH, which is the most heavily devolved among the national government agencies, has been doing in the last 30 years, yeah, is to reconfigure the local health systems. Yeah, and the latest attempt, marami yan, interlocal health zones, province-wide health spending for health, kasi na-realize nila the right size is actually the province. Why? Because you have scale. Yeah, and then you have you should respect the hospital referral system.
Mm.
Yeah, pero kung fragmented yan, iba yung may-ari ng primary healthcare sa tertiary healthcare, nabibreak yung hospital referral system. Yeah, so if you think about the UHC, it is again an attempt to reconfigure the local health system, short of amending the local government code. Because ang tamang approach dyan is to revise the local government code. But I think it's very difficult. So they're doing it differently, either by department orders, administrative orders, or via the UHC. But it will still run in conflict with the provisions of the local government code. Kaya hindi sila maka full blast eh. Hinay-hinay muna sila, titingnan nila ano yan eh, parang the test case kayo or experimental basis. See if it's going to work. But part of the indicators I think they're monitoring is that whether they will get enough support from local officials if they reconfigure the fragmented health systems this way. Pero yung rollout niyan, iffy yan, kasi that depends on the participation of the local government officials. But if you had been able, if we can revise the local government code, di na kailangan yan because the codes, will mandate that. So that's it. Yeah. Marami pa sana ako sasabihin pero wala na oras.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. We are on our final question for the Q&A, and we have Dr. Paul Hodgcroft, I think, is raising a question. Paul, are you there?
Greetings. So good to see everybody. I've really enjoyed this presentation for the presentations of everyone. Very enlightening. And my question is thinking prospectively to the implementation of the Mandanas ruling. Of course, one of the key paradoxes of decentralization is it requires a great deal of central oversight and guidance for it to work well and fairly across a number of units, particularly when you have as many LGUs as there are in the Philippines. So I wanted to ask everyone, including Dr. Asuncion, to give your sense of how well prepared the national government is to offer its assistance and guidance at a point when local government units are going to be getting a major new tranche of funds on an annual basis, and they need to be able to spend that wisely. Of course, we know that some are already well poised to do so, but particularly for those that are on the laggard side, how well prepared is the national government to be able to provide the kind of assistance that is necessary to deal with this very dramatic change in the national revenue sharing scheme? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, in the interest of time, we would like to ask our panelists and reactors to please answer briefly. Thank you very much. Would like to answer the question first.
Sir, can I go first?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so so if I got the question right, we are not talking how prepared is the DOH in implementing the devolution. So the EO was issued June 1, 2020, and the IRR was issued July 2, 2021. But for the DOH, we already consulted among us internally April of 2021, and we created already the team and the committees and the TWG by February 17. And by May 24, we had an inception workshop with the different LGU leagues. And then and we started to cascade to the different our regional offices, the department DOH-CHDs by June, and to the LGUs July, August. And we were able to meet the deadline of submitting the DTP September 30, but it underwent revision. So to give a background of our DTP, it will be implemented by phases. So from 2022, 23, and 24. The DTP also included what are the TA needs of the different LGUs and the TA plan. Although it was stated in the IRR of the executive order that the lead for the capacity development of our LGUs is our local government academy or the LGA of the DILG. So nag-start na actually ang aming mga regional offices about the capacity building for the Department of Health, and we also have an ongoing communication plan. So another question is, some of our the LGUs are very busy with the COVID-19 response, and alam naman natin yun na talaga may epekto sa how the LGU are responding. But for the Department of Health, sinama po ang UHC, ang devolution activities na exception doon sa response to the COVID-19. So talagang hindi namin pwedeng gawing rason that the UHC implementation, the devolution, will be stopped because of the pandemic. So sabay-sabay po yan ginagawa just by tasking the different bureaus who are involved and the different people within the bureau to respond to help in the response of the Department of Health. So I hope it answers the question of Dr. Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asuncion. Anyone from our panelists who wants to respond to the question?
Very quick. Yeah, very quickly, Rob. Thank you, Paul, for the question. I think it's not only because Dr. Asuncion is here, but really based on studies on how different departments have adjusted to devolution, and maybe because health was the most affected basic service that has been affected by the 1991 Local Government Code. The DOH has really tried many things to reorganize in order to make devolution work, even if, of course, the delivery of services have been fragmented as a result of devolution. And in a way, it's more attuned to what LGUs are lagging behind, what are the problems encountered. I think the SWD also has some has also reoriented itself in terms of working in a more devolved setup, but I am not sure how prepared the other national government agencies are in terms of really assisting LGUs, particularly the poorer ones, adjust to the new developments starting next year. It's not only because they have been affected by meeting the pandemic, but some of them in terms of mindset still have a very patronizing view of LGU. So they really have a more top-down relationship with many LGUs despite the 1991 local government code. I was actually expecting DILG, because of the EO issued this June, to actually push again for the reforms or amendments in the local government code that have been in a way postponed as a result of the pandemic, because they were in a position already. They were already talking with the various committees on constitutional reform even until February last year, before the lockdown, regarding certain amendments in not only in the constitution but actually in the local government code to prepare better for 2022. But I guess at this point that will also require the cooperation of the two houses of Congress, and at this point we may not expect a lot, or well, at least until the elections. But maybe the DILG can once again focus on amendments, if not in the constitution, in the local government code immediately after the 2022 elections to better prepare and help poorer, disadvantaged LGUs prepare for this. It's already 2022 next year to prepare for this additional. It's not really additional budget, but additional responsibilities. Thank you.
Dr. Brillantes, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Paul. It's always good to hear from Paul and your question. But yeah, you know, I mean, even before the pandemic, as a matter of fact, the ALG at one point already came up preparing for the Mandanas decision. So under Secretary Mavel, they took a look at what are all the functions that are currently being implemented by national government at the local government. How much are these? And then we're supposed to quote unquote compute some of this and put that in the computation of the figure for the money for the Mandanas. Okay, so in one sense, parang it was just I wouldn't say sleight of hand, pero just reconfiguring, if you may well come from. But equally important, not than the pandemic hit, but equal tuloy pa rin yung trabaho in terms of coming up now with EO 138. What is 138? Talks about capacity building, role of LGA, and I think that's very important. You know, and of course we have to look at the four major sectors that were implemented: social services, health, environment, and agriculture. But even as I was doing this, parang deja vu ito, pare. Why? Because these were exactly the same questions that were raised in 1992. You're talking about unfunded mandates. You're talking about absorptive capacities. You're talking about capacity build at the local level. And you're talking about quote unquote, are there going to be real monies? But that having been said, I think in response to your question, many of the NGOs have actually been working on their devolution transition plans, as Ma'am pointed out. But in 1972, we had also our respective devolution committees in all these sectors. So we might have learned from that, no? But I would say it's devolution prime at this point in time. But whether it will be able to push the envelope as far as we could, I don't know, because of course, as we all know, everybody got hit the pandemic, and as Tukoy pointed out, there's no real money here now. Okay. There's no real money here. And then when you talk about computing 3 years hence, it was only before the pandemic. But after the pandemic, ililipat na lahat yun. So I don't know where the money will come from. And the hard part there is, given the mindset, as pointed out by Ma'am Ella here, no? Given the mindset, ililipat na sa kanila lahat eh. Sandali lang, mukhang talo yata tayo. And that's what the LGUs are saying at this point in time. No? Okay, ililipat ba lahat? Kung ililipat lahat, dapat ilipat rin yung the appropriate funding. But remember 1991, we were talking about unfunded mandates. Ella also referred to that. Will that happen all over again? I don't know. But I think all of these things have to figure into the discussion of these devolution transition committees. And real figures, I think, and as Dokoy just pointed out, it's very important. No? But yeah, I mean, given, again, afterwards, kung sasabihin ni Ed, realistic, optimistic, well, they're working on it. They're just working on it, and let's just and then my transition plans, and you have these different committees. And of course, I guess the other thing is elections around the corner. Baka it will just drag along. I don't know. No, but like I said, we should be talking real money here. Otherwise, talong LG dito.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Brillantes. Dr. Capuno, any remarks on that question?
I have nothing much to say in response to Paul. Paul, hi. Perhaps elaborate on what Alex and Ella have said.
Okay.
We are in a better position now. I mean, knowledge-wise, wisdom-wise, experience-wise. And Alex is still here, yeah, and he is still advising the ILG politicians and all that in Congress, you know, on how to do it or how to avoid the mistakes we experienced before. So basically, the question lang naman is that will there be surprises as far as the LGUs are concerned? Surprises in the sense that is the scale of devolved function bigger than what I can anticipate, and therefore, you know, I will be ill prepared, or there will be the new devolved functions. Yeah, totally wala sa akin dati yan. Binigyan mo ako, for example, ng hospital. Wala sa akin. Yun lang naman yung surprises eh. But it is going to be more of the same and within the fiscal space created by the era. And also, you know, with the Committee on Devolution exercising oversight on the implementation. I think we are in a far better position now than in 1991, 1992. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kapuno. We would like to thank our speakers and panelists, Dr. Brillantes, Dr. Kapuno, and Dr. Atienza, our reactors, Dr. Tadim and Dr. Asuncion. This has been a very, very interesting, lively, and interactive discussion. There are a lot more questions raised in our Q&A box, but we don't have enough time, unfortunately. The discussion focused on a lot of points, no? And I think the highlight would be what would be the promise of devolution given the 30 years of experience that we've already had. The sad part probably is that we're still asking the same questions, but the good part is that we have our experience with us, no? A variety of experiences, good and bad experiences, that we could use as an input to how to improve the process of devolution and decentralization in the Philippines, especially looking forward the implementation of the Mandanas ruling and the expansion of possibly the roles of local government. No? And thank you very much also to our attendees. And to finally close this webinar, we would like to have with us to give the closing remarks. We have Dr. Raquisa, who is also the chair of the UP Task Force for Nation Building, and also a professor of Asian Studies at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Dr. Raquisa.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert. So let me just add a little bit of some of the points that were raised here. So basically, I just really want to start with the question of are we anticipating complete devolution? And apparently, according to some, you know, and the conversation after the presentation actually was much more interesting for me and brought out a lot more of the finer points that we are looking for as far as, you know, the challenges of what we're facing in terms of the Mandanas ruling and also the Executive Order 138. So are we actually finally going to have complete devolution? And based on the discussion, it is probably not. A lot of factors came out in terms of like what are there are prerequisites for complete devolution, and some of the factors were actually said here. One was the question of the resources, the availability of resources. Dr. Brillantes and also, of course, Dr. Kapuno mentioned that, you know, the problem of like us coming out of the pandemic is that we just will not be able to have that resources. But also second is that, you know, the resources has to be commensurate with the services that's going to be devolved. So in other words, you can't really have full devolution if you don't have the resources, because again, we go back to the problem of this will be a burden to our local governments and eventually to the local population, local communities. But the second thing also that was raised is, of course, the capacity of local government. And what I liked about Dr. Kapuno's mention is that, you know, there is such a thing, and which is the political economy of power in the local governance or local level. The third is, of course, and then there's also the question of, you know, you can't look at local government code or local governance without looking at it. It's not a standalone policy. So you do have to look at, and everybody has mentioned this, the role of national government on one hand, and the role and how power is configured both at the national and local. So you have a policy that is in fact that is based on what is structured, is defined, is influenced by the configuration of power, especially at the local level. And many, Dr. Atienza and Dr. Tadem did mention the importance or the presence of political dynasties. So with that, we also, I think, in a sense, we've also brought out a lot of interesting recommendations. And I think one of the more interesting recommendation is coming from Dr. Brillantes, Alex sinabi mo to, rethinking and decentralization. You said this. So anyway, so well, there was the question of like, you know, the need to amalgate, whether there's a need to amalgate administrative and territorial divisions, the barangays. There's one of the revealing information is that 90% of the barangays are actually non-viable, right? Because you do have really such small units to the point that you don't have economies of scale. You don't, you know, you have like and basically this divisions is driven by the era. The second thing is again is that question of like the need to really look at how the local government can generate its own resources. Dr. Capuno comes up with a really good point, which is, you know, they just need to be able to tax people. And if they can't do that, then that becomes a major problem, because even if you devolve, you know, like a bigger part of, if you give a bigger part of national tax revenues, the problem is if it's not used to generate more resources at the local level, then that will always fall short of what, you know, local communities really need. So we did come out with some recommendations here. One is in terms of devolution. Is it complete devolution? What has been discussed is question of sequencing and selective implementation, right? So sequencing in terms of like devolving services gradually, but also in terms of selective implementation in terms of the readiness at the level of local development and the readiness of, or what you would say, absorptive capacity of local governments. There's also the question of community participation that of course Dr. Tade mentioned. So in what we're going to do as far as the Pilipilunas, that Task Force National Nation Building will do, is actually to consolidate all the recommendations that have been presented here and then in consultation, of course, with Dr. Atienza and the team. We do want to be able to come up with a recommendation, also not only from the presenters, but also from our discussants, Dr. Asuncion and Dr. Tadem. So let me just go back to you know, what Pilipilunas is all about. And as Chancellor Nemenzo mentioned, the purpose of Pilipilunas webinars is to demonstrate the policy consequences of research taking place at the National University. It has always been the ambition of UP to contribute robustly to the store of knowledge that underpins policymaking, particularly on the crucial questions of development, governance, and security. We hope that these webinars, including what we have right now, will start a sustained and consequential dialogue between members of the university and policymakers. As the Chancellor also mentioned, that hashtag Pilipilunas 2022 aims to consolidate the policy recommendations that came out from here and also other webinars into a governance agenda that we hope to present to the national candidates and the public leading to and beyond the 2022 national and local elections. With that, let me again end and repeat what Robert mentioned. And in behalf of the national task force, so on behalf of the task force nation building, let me just give our profound thanks to Dr. Maria Ella Atienza and the Program for Social and Political Change of the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies for convening this webinar this morning. And to our speakers, Dr. Alex Brillantes Jr., Dr. Joseph Capuno, and of course, Ella, again, our reactors, Director Irma Asuncion and Dr. Ed Tadem. And last but not least, our moderator, who is right now in Wuhan. That's why there was some questions or problems of technical glitches, but Assistant Professor John Robert Go of the Political Science Department. We also would like to thank UP sa Halalan 2022 of the UP Department of Political Science, DZUP, and the Diliman Information Office for helping us disseminate our activities. We'd like also, of course, to thank the participants. Last, let me just do a plugging. We have our last webinar on December 7. That will be on Philippine and regional security. That is going to be convened by the UPCIDS Strategic Studies Program. So we hope that everyone will be able to join us on December 7. We will come up with the schedule as soon as possible. Maraming salamat sa lahat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rakisa, and we would like to thank everyone again for attending this webinar. Once again, thanks to our speakers, to our reactors, to our participants who joined us for the past 3 hours, more than 3 hours already. Thanks to the Secretariat of the UP Task Force, and of course the UPCIDS. And we end our webinar here. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.
I hate to break protocol, but I never said that barangays were 90%.
Sorry.
No.
Hindi ba?
No, we should consider amalgamation, but I didn't say 90%. But like I said, sorry for breaking protocol, but that's a factual statement, which I think I should like to correct. Thank you very much. But great synthesis.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
for correction.
Okay. Thank you.
Everyone.
Yeah. And have a nice weekend to everyone. It's